be here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish International. I'm your host, Darren Mooney, and joining me are...
Jay.
Grace.
And Ronan.
Now, we have a usual format where we talk about what we watched this week, we talk about the film news, and we talk about the top 10 and the new releases, but this week is something of a different week, I think. On last Friday, I believe Agnès Varda passed away. Varda has obviously been a huge influence on this podcast, to the point where it's been referred to affectionately as the Varda cast on occasion, with both Jay and Ronan taking a trip through her work. I believe in part inspired by an IFI season a little over a year ago.
Last summer, I think.
Last summer as well. So we thought that we might mark her passing just by opening with a discussion of her work and her legacy. Because I believe it's quite possible that at least one of you has watched nothing but Agnès Varda films this week.
Pretty much. I mean, that's the only appropriate thing to do. I think the news was announced kind of Friday morning, and as well as the fact that there were a lot of films that I already hadn't seen available on Mubi at the moment, it was obviously just a real push to go off and explore/re-explore. So for my part, I went off and watched everything available to me that I hadn't already seen, which was about, I think, 6 films maybe, and rewatched a few as well. My first port of call was to just rush back into the arms of the Gleaners and I, which was my favourite from that IFI retrospective last year, and then culminated last night with a rewatch of Faces Places, which was, I think, my third Verd I had seen when I caught it at a festival screening in 2017, and kind of kicked my love affair into high gear. And as regular listeners will know, because they've heard me talk pretty much every week since then, it's been intense since then.
Yeah, I actually Faces Places my first one in May of 18, which seems like 5 years ago, but it's not that long ago. And I watched it. And I watched it and I was kind of like, holy shit, I need to watch more. And I rewatched it also because I persuaded my wife to watch it, who was listening to me banging on about it for about 9 months, about various Varda films, and hasn't watched any, and there's no real interest as such. But she loved it, and really interesting to rewatch it in the context of having watched 19 other films, and plays so much better in the context of how she plays with the format and the form of documentary, and the kind of shooting, reshooting, obviously set up things that she does and does in a lot of her films. Like, she plays with the idea of what documentaries are, what they should be, how you can mess with that formula, and Face Place is really interesting in that regard. It's not our best film, but which is, I think it's our 52nd.
Made it 88.
Yeah, it's pretty goddamn great. And similar to Ronan, I had a couple left that I hadn't seen on Mubi, but I'd been kind of making my way slowly through them, and I presume we've watched the same couple that I've seen. So
I think at this point our combined watch list is we've seen pretty much, I think we've each seen one the other hasn't.
Yes.
You've seen Documentaire, which I haven't seen.
And you've seen One Thing the Other Doesn't, which I haven't seen because I missed that thing. But I watched 2 at the weekend, aside from Face Place, which was The Beaches of Agnes, which was her kind of, I guess, penultimate film. Well, it wasn't really, because there's 2 more since, but at the time was considered her goodbye film in 2008. And it's the 4th film of a kind of series of films she did after the death of Jacques Demy, her husband. And it's also a reflection of her career, of her life, of her legacy.
Her various roles as filmmaker, as cultural presence,
as family member, as lover of cats, as all sorts. Like, and cats do play quite a part in The Beach of Agnes. They pop up here and everywhere.
It's one of the many things I've noticed. I mean, across the last year and a half, and especially across the last week, revisiting films and visiting for the first time, you see all these things that pop up throughout. I remember when I saw Walkure, her first film, at the IFI retrospective. There are cats everywhere. Yeah. And I remember thinking, this was 65 years ago, and here she is, like,
still knocking around with
cats. And it's the same with pretty much all of her themes.
Yeah, Faces Places is there.
The ideas of death and decay are there from the very start through to the end, but always that sense of
and even I think the final line, or one of the final lines of The Beach of Agnes is "While I live, I remember," and that obviously is a little more bittersweet now, but because she considered, like, I think even when we watched The Gleaners and it's kind of she was considering her own demise. She was in her 70s at that stage, or anyway, and kind of using the new kind of found small digital camera she could bring everywhere, kind of focusing on her hands and her face and stuff like that, and that's here. And it's a wonderful documentary, extremely moving, kind of run to her memory palace, I guess, her kind of ideas and kind of thing. I've looking back, it's like I have actually amassed something of worth, and then she obviously had, but I think even at that stage, the kind of things that, like, she wasn't really celebrated up until that film, really.
That's what kind of kicked off her.
And the idea that then people say, hang on a second, did she kickstart a new wave? And yes, she did, but was never given any credit for. And then was kind of patronisingly called the grandmother of the new wave, as opposed to the first filmmaker of the new wave, because that's how they do things. And obviously, certain filmmakers probably didn't want to share the limelight in that regard, Mr. Goddard and etc. etc. And that's how these things and colleges follow. We get the canon, blah blah blah. I'm not going to argue that.
Well, okay. Just before we jump in on this,
I'm not jumping in to do that.
Okay,
I think
I think that Conor Murphy made a point online that when he studied film, Varda was very much included as a central part of the course that he studied.
Well, if you're lucky to be the case, but that is not always the case, and several people I chatted to wasn't the case, and I would have also experienced that, and it's not standard. No. If you get a particular lecturer who is well clued into wherever, that's always the way. I studied where my Darren was included in film kind of thing, where that's not standard either. And these things are important, but they're not standard is the point, and that's still a problem. And anybody who's studied, I know Grace has discussed this a little bit, and I've discussed it with Grace about that, about how filmmaking worships at the altar of certain filmmakers, colleges worships at the altar of certain filmmakers, and this is not to say those filmmakers are important. Of course they are. Film history is important. Of course it is.
But it's a very reductive and insular way of looking at it.
Yes, it is, and it's a problem, and it's a continuing problem. And we still see lists from new filmmakers of their favourite films, and they're all kind of male for all intents and purposes. And my problem is, and my worry is, and as we come closer again to, we're 2 years away from the new Sight and Sound 10-year poll that they do every year. I think there was 2 films on the last list directed by women in 2012, and that's not 2012 isn't 1948. This is pretty recent. We'll see how many there are in 2022, and I would still worry. I think it's got better, but I don't think it's got nearly as good as it should be, and nowhere near as fast as it should be.
Not at all, and on either account. But I mean, even if you look at things like and again, arguably the recognition came far too late, but it did come, and there's a sense that things are changing.
No, it did come, and Varda did it. In fairness, she did it with a kind of smile and a twinkle, and wandered around the Oscars and sent her cardboard picture with a cat and whatever, and that's great, and it's fun, and it's brilliant, and she deserves every accolade she got. But she, if you go through her work, it's remarkable that this wasn't recognised in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s.
It's absolutely emblematic of some of the greatest female artists in any medium, that she just kind of put her head down and got herself away from this world and just carried on making incredible work while often not enough people were looking. And
it's worth pointing out, I think, and this is something I've been thinking about all week, and I do want to talk about another film of hers just before we finish it up, but I think what's really worth pointing out is that and I was thinking what makes her unique or remarkable, whatever, she's perhaps, certainly in the second half of the last century up to now, I think maybe even from kind of the 20s onwards, she's the only filmmaker, the only woman director in Hollywood that takes a long time to go through her filmography. Because I've been thinking about I went through Kelly Reichardt's filmography, Andre Arnold's filmography, Lynn Ramsey's film. You can watch them in weekends because they've made 2 or 3 or 4 films. Elaine May made 4 films in his 10-15 year career, and that's that. Like, Varda's 50-something films by being uncompromising, doing her own thing, doing it cheap. Like, she's probably the only filmmaker since the 20s. There was silent era filmmakers that made a lot of films that weren't recognised also, but that's another conversation. But she's the only filmmaker that takes a bloody effort, to get access to, and God bless Mubi, they've been doing stellar work, and Filmstruck similarly, which started her off. And, they don't exist, women filmmakers don't exist that have 30 or 20 films. They don't exist. You can watch pretty much every woman filmmaker that's currently working today in 2 nights. And that's shameful. That's absolutely shameful. And that has to change, or else it's all for nothing. Like, it's a waste. It's an absolute waste of time.
It will.
It bloody better, because it's pointless otherwise, because all you get is one perspective, and it's exhausting.
It is.
It will change, and we will have a lovely onslaught of female filmmakers right before the planet dies around us, and we all get to go out happy.
Exactly.
I mean, I would be very much of the sense that it's good that, like, it happened far too late. I'm not pretending that it didn't. And you're right that she toiled away in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s without the recognition that she deserved. But I found it kind of heartening as a sign that things are changing, that there was that level of...
I think the warmth towards her as she passed was really impressive and very emotional, and I loved some of the tributes from a lot of people, a lot of film fans that genuinely like it. It's very moving and very emotional, and I love that.
I mean, the photos of like the class in Paris, with the flowers and stuff. I mean, the outpouring is tremendous, and it's recognition that was long overdue, but it's good to see it at all.
My point is,
I think if anything, it shows that there was a big audience out there who really did love her and appreciate her. They just may not be the most vocal among our online film ranting.
I completely agree, and
shockingly enough.
But to kind of finish on it, from my point of view, I think Ronan's probably a few more films to talk about, but I watched Jacques Audiard, which is her film from 1991, which was the last one I hadn't seen of the ones that are available to me, and brought me up to 20 films I've seen of hers. And this film absolutely floored me.
It slaps.
It slaps, as the kids say. I think Agnes would like that. It's this film, and it's one of her quartet of films she made post her husband's death. And this one is this was filmed while he was still alive. He was writing his basically memoirs and his memories, and his stuff was coming back to him. And she said, "Would we make a film?" And he said he couldn't do it, so would she do it? And she made it while he was still alive, running against the clock essentially, and finished it, I think, 10 days before he died. And I think he viewed it in an early cut of it before he died. This is a film about his childhood. It's a fictional, in terms of drama films, as actors, etc., etc. But it's also more than that. It kind of touched on documentary. It touches on landscape in a way that you get shots of these beautiful small towns and archways, and then you get shots of Demi's face and hair, and he's older. He's like, there's just little snippets of documentary. It actually really reminded me of Song of Granite, and I suspect Pat Collins has seen this, because there's some beautiful black and white photography mixed with documentary, mixed with kind of different, beautiful, personal, wonderful things, and it's astonishing. And it's what I thought about, like, she literally made his life flash before his eyes before he died, which is remarkable to me, and is probably a great tribute you can do to somebody. I thought it was absolutely stunning, and he's the saddest eyes, Jack, to me. Particularly when he's older. There's some great shots of him and the cat getting in the way on the desk when he's trying to write, which is another Varda motif that'll pop up. But I was floored by it, and as a kind of tribute, I couldn't have finished on a better one in terms of, obviously I have 33 more films to watch, which I will get to eventually, but amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can I just say, as someone who has, je m'excuse, not watched any Varda's work yet, I do think it's lovely that just through listening to the two of you talk about her and talk about her work, like, there's such an obvious warmth there, and it always sounds like her work is just so enthusiastic and distinctive and original, and just like, it's just so lovely to listen to people talk about a filmmaker in a way that's just purely joyful, you know?
It is.
Like, there's no cynicism, there's no sarcasm.
It's idiosyncratic, and it's cold, essentially. Like, I mean, she's seen as a kind of a grandmother of film and kind of slightly thing, but some of the earlier films are really dark and really kind of cold and really interesting and harsh, and kind of force you to kind of confront certain things. And I think that part of the reputation is also getting recognised, and I think Ronan probably has seen a few around that as well, like in the last weekend.
Yeah, I really threw myself into a lot over the weekend. But you're exactly right that she almost had this reputation for being kind of cutesy and quirky in the latter life, which is true, she was, and she very much embraced that. But she had a much sort of deeper, darker side as well. And it's interesting looking at these films in the context of the last week after her death. Her entire body of work, it strikes me, it's unique in the way that it is obsessed with death.
Yeah.
And yet so sort of light-hearted and warm. Warm is absolutely the word for it. I was reading an interview with her in Cleo, which named for one of her films, where she said that warm is exactly the word for her films, that they're not sort of sweet or cute or anything like that. I dipped in and out of various different periods of her career, and it's fascinating to me. Obviously, like you say, Jay, she made about 50, 60 films. And even at the 20 that we've both seen, we've almost barely scratched the surface in that way. There's so much more still. But dipping in and out of her films, it's amazing how different each one is, but how there's a kind of through line you can connect any two together, because they're always these
thematically, and there's fascination's always there. And
it's fascinating. I watched Jack O'Donnell this week as well, and it's beautiful. Exactly that cut between the sort of Italian neorealist style of the narrative and then the up-close documentary that's sort of deeply distressing. Like, Demi is dying before your eyes, and crucially before Varda's eyes, and she's grieving in real time through this film. And that shadow is kind of felt through the next 30 years of her cinema, essentially, that she is coping with the idea of mortality and considering it in her own light, how this is now happening to her. Because I think from then on, pretty much every film I've seen, you get close-ups of her own face and her own hair, and in the same way she's examining the kind of, her own decaying body and what's happening to her, but never without a sort of real sense of levity.
And wonder and surprise and devilment and all sorts of things.
Endless curiosity. Yeah. It's watching Faces Places to kind of top this off last night, because her last film, which premiered 2 months ago at the age of 90, it's incredible. We still have one to go, which is great. But Faces Places, her most recent film, that's available, watching that. And she sort of turns to JR at one point, her co-director, and says, "I worry that every person I meet is going to be the last one." And she goes from heavy things like that to a while later, she's like, "I'm kind of looking forward to death, because at least that'll be that." she takes it absolutely in her stride.
And about turn to, "Oh, there's the postman."
There's just such warmth and humour. But, you know, she goes from laughing to crying, and it's very hard not to do that as well when you're watching her films. And there's just such a range of stuff, like deeply political things like Black Panthers I watched over the weekend, which is a documentary
really
it's a short documentary that is kind of remarkable for its starting point, which is just pure empathy, which is crucial for Varda throughout her career. But it's not taking a sort of let's look at both sides stance. It's just unequivocally,
it's clear where she
stands.
This is a
civil
civil
rights issue, and these people are being horribly treated, and just allowing them to speak for themselves. Crucially, there is a sort.
She doesn't get it away.
There's a voiceover that kind of explains things, but it is focused on the speeches of the Black Panthers. It's fascinating for that. Likewise, we watched The Beaches of Agnes, which is absolutely beautiful. She sort of does an autobiographical thing, very similar, I thought, to Jack O'Donnell. It's like doing that for herself, talking about her own life through the medium of the film she's made. And at one point gathers all of her family dressed in white on the beach. And
kind of reminded Tree of Life. I wonder if Malik has seen it, because it has that kind of, the end of the Tree of Life, where the kind of people wandering, it has that feel to it.
Yeah. There's that absolutely pervasive influence that you can see in each of her films. I remember watching Walkure, which is from 1955, and going, hang on, that shot looks like one from Bergman.
Yeah.
Who made Persona 10 years later, a very similar shot. Her influence just kind of...
Unacknowledged influence, it should be added.
Felt down the decades.
Yeah.
Absolutely remarkable. Even in films that I don't think necessarily stand out at the top of her game, stuff like maybe The Young Girls Turn 25, which is an interesting little portrait of one of Demi's films of the 25th anniversary. It's kind of behind the scenes. It plays like a featurette, but obviously with a special Varda twist.
A lot of footage.
Yes, it's down with Catherine Deneuve, and again, it's part of a grieving process that is always a celebration of Demi's life without any sort of overtly upset mourning, but there's a clear sense of loss there.
That moment where he puts the jumper on very delicately. And she kind of prefaces it with like that kind of loss, that kind of thing is wonderful.
Absolutely she always captures these moments. It's been an exhausting week.
Yeah.
But in the best kind of way, because I went through an interesting process with this when the news broke on Friday. It was, of course, up front very kind of very difficult thing to deal with, because although she's 90 and she's had such an incredible career, she had such vivacity that it kind of comes across as a tough loss. And not to mention, she just premiered a film 2 months ago. She's still working.
I thought it'd be another one. And I like it genuinely.
Still producing excellent work all the time.
There are other stories of people like Ava DuVernay were saying, like when she had breakfast with her Cannes, she did say that this was the last year of her life, and obviously it was a diagnosis, and she knew, but it's amazing how vital she was.
And she said it explicitly in a lot of, she didn't necessarily say, "I'm going to die soon" in any interviews, but she said explicitly, "This is my final film, I think I'm done now," all this sort of thing. And that kind of thing, and the films themselves, I think especially Faces Places, very much feel like something that she planned in such a way that you can watch these now in this context of being without her, and it's like a guide to a world without her. And I did.
It is. You should be preparing the world in a way.
really
Bowie
is,
maybe kind of
Black
the only
Sky,
one.
for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
and not in any kind of egocentric way,
No.
because ego and Verta just do not go together in any way. But watching these films, I kind of expected to be really sad watching them, but I wasn't at any
I'd be
point.
the same.
It's really
Yeah.
joyful and wonderful. I just had the best time discovering new worlds and diving into old favourites.
That's not a bad week.
It really isn't, and it'll always be like that. For decades and decades, people will be discovering
Because
these
lads,
films,
you'll be
discovering her
sick of
world.
us. We'd be still banging on about this 10 years from now for
Varda
this
season
podcast.
really doesn't
It never
Run
ends.
around in a
Never,
Zimmer frame
ever,
going,
ever ends.
Agnes,
Sounds good.
Agnes.
Do you think you'll finish? Because we've had this discussion before with people like, say, Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, we're
Where
still a
for-
couple of films.
For Jay's
still to go.
perspective, like, it's you want to savor them and you want to leave them. Like, is the urge to rush through what you have, or is it to take it drip and drab?
I'll get to them all because I really, really want to. Like, I want to see everything and then start again.
Yeah.
Like, there's no mad rush at this stage. And like, I would have liked to watch them all before she died, weirdly. But I don't really know why. It doesn't really make a difference. I
It
guess,
doesn't.
but-
Yeah, that's the thing.
But I do want to watch them all and kind of buy a big, massive Blu-ray box set when somebody releases it and just have them all sitting there on my shelf. And then anybody, somebody who comes into your house, start telling them all, bore the shit out of somebody who didn't know nothing of them, God help them, they're going to get pressed on them.
It's
Point into the podcast.
Indeed.
It's a kind of difficult question with a lot of people, but for Verda, what occurred to me this week is that she's now, at this point, after all these films I watched this week, one of just 5 filmmakers I've seen 20 or more films by, and the only one of those where every single film I'd recommend. Everyone.
Yeah, I
is,
did my 20 lists of, and I put on Letterboxd and I put on Twitter. The lowest, which is at 20, is 3 stars.
Yeah, and the exact same 3 stars is as low as it goes, and I think there are maybe 2, 3 3-stars in there. Every film has something and is in some
that regard,
way.
she's as good a filmmaker as there has ever been.
And because of that, I want to explore every one of these.
Yeah.
I want to see every one of these. The only issue is maybe accessibility. I mean,
But we'll get there.
No, we will absolutely.
You
But
best
it's like,
believe it.
There are all these wonderful things that just aren't. There's a 4-hour series from 2011 where she travels the world meeting all her favourite artist friends.
We just stop.
Yeah.
You're going to
just
kill him.
Could you,
30 more things for us to discover.
I mean, you can just run those through. You can run them through Google Translate.
And plus, I imagine there might be a couple on YouTube, although I haven't really searched.
Yeah. I did a little bit of searching for some of her earlier stuff and couldn't come across it, but there are huge DVD box sets. She did great work, it should be said, as well as a film conservationist. And preserving hers and Demi's work.
And Scorsese did a lot of work actually around
restoring
Foundation and stuff like that. That's restorative, thankfully, which is great. And Criterion Channel launches next Monday. So, hopefully there was Varda stuff on Filmstruck, so I would suspect there will be Varda stuff on
as well.
Was
on
there
there
stuff
as well.
you didn't get a chance
Well,
to see?
at that point, there was stuff like there was a few that I have now subsequently seen on Mubi that were there, so I can't remember exactly what was there that I hadn't seen. We will be there at some point again, and I'll get more. Varda season will never end.
We will be talking forever.
Perfect.
Pour one out for Agnes.
Yep.
Ronan may have baked some sweet treats.
That's with the rustling
in
and the
celebration.
shoelace, people.
They're slightly burned because I was watching Faces
They're
Places
delicious.
and I just got very distracted.
But yeah, so we'll move on to sort of business as usual, even 25 minutes into the podcast.
Yeah.
But I know, Ronan, you haven't watched much apart from what we've just discussed.
You say that like this wasn't business as usual, talking about Varda.
That's true.
I would hope the passing of Agnès Varda is not business as usual.
Her name became new shorthand for films, being the
As a
recommended
measure of length.
80
It's
minutes.
a measure of length, yes.
I did get
How many Vardas could I watch instead?
Yeah,
of
exactly.
This crap
Infinity
movie?
War is what, 2.5 Vardas? But yes.
That does not fall into the crap movie column, people.
But Jay, did you watch anything except Agnes?
I did. Thank you, Darren.
Fully
for...
expecting him to just go a bunch of mediocre trash.
I
by
waited
comparison.
until he had a mouthful and I just pounced.
That's okay. I appreciate
Hey, what
that.
did you eat this week?
Well,
We're pivoting the podcast.
well, I took a recommendation
That's
from
a lot of
Ronan.
ASMR.
Hey, we renamed
Oh
the
God!
WhatsApp
Oh why?
thread.
And this is one of the Ronan semi-serious recommendations I don't think he thought I'd follow through with. And I watched the Sweeney.
Which one I was going for?
The Ray Winston and what's his name? Plan B, whatever his face is.
Kit
Yes.
Harington?
It's quite something.
No, he's actually
Is he
like a
not in
rapper.
that?
He's
His name
called
is
Plan
actually
B.
Plan B.
He did the Luke side stuff.
He's got a real name. I can't. It's Ben somebody or
Well,
whatever.
I have no idea who this is, but is Kit
Anyway.
Harington not in that?
I don't
No,
think
you're
so.
thinking of like Spooks, right? MI5, 9 to 5.
Yeah, there was a movie that.
It was, yeah. Which
all
they had to
look the same.
rebrand in the States for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed.
Oh wow!
You,
Anyway.
you learn interesting things, right?
The Sweeney. This was fascinating. I don't know what to expect of this. Like, there's two things. Like, Ray Winston, because of his Bet365 ads, has ruined himself a little bit, unfortunately.
He ruined himself long before that.
He
just
did
by
to
being
some
Ray
degree,
Winston.
but like
No
when you
offense to Ray Winston, but no.
when you become a caricature of yourself, it's very hard post that to take it seriously a little bit. And I used to like Ray Winston; he's done some great work. So he can do the Sweeney thing because it's the East End of London. Get your knickers on, makes a cup of tea, love type stuff, like right. Which obviously without the '70s kind of
Somehow
misogyny
you're
to
getting,
some
you're
degree,
getting them in
right?
stereo, listeners.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of liked it. It's weird. It takes a little while to get going. There's some great car chase sequences, really well filmed as well, which I was kind of surprised. And no, in terms of like car chases, there's very few good car chases anymore because of CGI and whatever and various other things. But these were particularly good, particularly one down a kind of country lane, which is just one kind of strip. You know, there's no space for two cars, so it has a nice tension to it and really well shot. And has this really kind of fascinating cold cinematography, that kind of bouncing green light off buildings and stuff like that, which I really liked, and added a sort of a kind of slightly grander look to a film that didn't really deserve to some degree. And the last act's a bit of a mess, but the two of them are okay in it. Like I kind of enjoyed it. It's not good, but it's not bad. You know,
It's not good.
No, it's not. But there is fun to be
But
had
is
there.
it great?
Like, it's certainly not great. Not at all.
That's the most muted response Jay's had to something.
I know. I'm really middle ground.
It was almost
Like,
pleasantly.
yeah, it was grand, as Darren would put it.
yes.
A gentleman's 2.5.
It's very weird because it is, like, on paper, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But then there's this interesting stuff about Ray Winston constantly being in his underwear and like,
Yeah.
undermining his own sense of
And
masculinity.
the fact that what's her name? That was in Agent Carter,
Oh, Haley Atwell.
who has to pretend to fancy Ray Winston, and this is the biggest
And there was
unbelievable
leak of
thing.
suspension.
That Brie
Just
Larson
leak.
having to pretend like she liked Jonah Hill was the
Yes.
worst thing that had ever happened.
Also, there's
I
a
retract
TV
that
show called
statement.
Illumin Terror where everybody has to pretend Jeff Daniels is God's gift to women and lads.
Stop.
He is not, and the whole idea, and it's
Jeff
ridiculous.
Daniels was at least objectively attractive.
Not
once.
this year, though. You know,
Once.
yeah. So
The
this
other
kind of
two
stuff,
we've
like,
mentioned no.
no.
Not ever.
Maybe
Poor
it's,
Haley Atwell.
maybe it's their personality. Anyway,
I hope you got well paid.
Poor Haley.
I also,
going from Chris Evans to that.
and in the spirit of bank robberies and stuff like that, I followed that up with Inside Man, Spike Lee's film.
which is great.
And
Probably my favorite Spike Lee. Not the best Spike Lee by any measure, but the one I'm most.
I
likely to watch.
really love it. It's a great New York film, one of the great New York films, and in that sense, its sense of place is remarkable.
Yeah.
And like not in a I'm walking here kind of way, in an actual
Full
sense.
geography of New
And
York.
people, the melting pot kind of thing, which is great. It's literally a genre film to smuggle in all sorts of stories about a city's ethnicity and how history erases that in both a figurative sense
And also
and
a
a literal
literal
sense.
sense,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's really interesting in that regard. Really, really interesting. And the moral of it and the reason why things are happening is really fascinating. And there's a
and the
great
way it
shot.
nestles all of that inside what's a really well constructed.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, it's a brilliantly constructed. Like, if it was just that, it'd be great fun.
Like, I mean, even
on its own. Like.
the narrative, like the construction of the twists and turns, it has, like, for a heist film where they're built on twists and turns, it has some of my favorites. Like, I mean, how they get out of the bank is one of the great heist movies.
I completely agree.
Like,
I love it. And all of that is great on its own.
Yeah.
But
And
then you
then-
add in a certain sense of history and identity and ethnicity, and there's this great shot near the end where Lee pulls the camera and just slowly from the front of a kind of a 4x4 all the way around to the side, and then you see that there's a family inside, and then you realise what's what.
yeah.
And it's this beautifully, not even religious, it's ethnic kind of, you realise what's at the heart of this,
Yeah.
and it's really beautiful shot. And Lee is like, kind of, look, we're all not just white Irish cops.
Yeah.
You know, this city is a lot different than people think,
And
and
it's traditionally depicted
and he's
even.
screaming it, and like Denzel Washington is Denzel
Washington.
Washington. He's fantastic. Him and AF4 are one of the great cop double acts. They're fantastic, and the fact they're two black guys is wonderful. As a change. And Jodie Foster is sensational.
Amazing, yeah.
Absolutely, she's like, I've loved Jodie Foster since forever, but my God, she's great in this. Yeah. And Christopher Plummer's great. It's just,
and even Clive Owen,
who's can be a little shaky on occasion, but he is very, very good.
Well,
he really is, and this is a great film. I loved it. Like, I liked it when I saw it first. Really liked it. And I rewatched since and kind of liked it. I kind of half watched it a little while back, about 2 years ago. So I'll properly watch it again for the first, and I absolutely adored it. It's so great.
It reminds me when we talk about Fincher, we talk about almost the stuff that's generally considered like second tier.
Yeah.
But that's a place where you get the directors almost showing off, because there's not the weight of expectation that you have with something like Do the Right Thing, where it's
sure.
like, this is Spike Lee as a statement. No, this is Spike Lee as a filmmaker, and you get all that stuff in there.
And we've
as well,
always said how great a technical filmmaker Lee is, and this one where you can showcase that, but also smuggle in where he wants to smuggle in as well.
Because you can't talk about Spike Lee without talking about the context and all that sort of stuff. But here it's just like, fuck, the man can make a great film.
You can. Like, he's one of the great American filmmakers. Like, one of the absolute great American filmmakers. And this is a great film. I absolutely loved it.
I really have to watch this again now, because I thought about when it came out, and I loved it exactly as that you were saying, as a great genre piece, but I don't think I fully appreciated everything.
Oh, there's a lot more. And I was actually kind of stunned how much is that, and how much I think you're right. When I saw it first, I don't think I picked up on.
Yeah. Well, because it's less loud about it.
Yeah,
than
it is.
Because this would have been around the time to do Bamboozle a little while later.
Yeah. He was always in that kind of smaller one, and the kind of bigger one, and that kind of stuff. Like,
and then you're conditioned almost to expect the smaller one's going to be outrageous and out there and say the things really loud.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But there's a lot. Ronan, I think you'll love it as a rewatch. Like, it's great.
I'm rewatching.
And finally, before I finish, I rewatched The Matrix, which was 20 on Transidentity Day on
Sunday,
Transvisibility Day on
Sunday.
Sunday. It was also the 20th anniversary of this coming into cinemas, The Matrix. So I started watching it Sunday. I only finished it last night because of various issues.
Because Jay watched the sequels and the Animatrix.
No, I did not. But I may watch the sequels again, which I didn't have a good time with. But I may watch them again just because it's been a lot. I haven't seen them since the cinema.
I like them.
Yeah, I think I have the same. But I might watch them again just as a fresh kind of.
I don't even remember them. I've seen them both and I don't remember anything.
I think most people have that. I remember certain sequences, but I don't remember a lot
scenes,
of it.
But I have no context for what's around.
Yeah, I remember the architect.
The bit in the highway and the bit in the lift,
the
and
twins,
the rave, that sort of thing.
But I'm kind of curious to go back because the Wachowskis are fascinating filmmakers.
They're amazing.
I watched eventually after falling asleep 4 times Cloud Atlas last year on Darren's kind of insistence.
Ronan just casually drops the Sweeney in. I had to work like 4 years to get this.
The Sweeney's easier. It's nearly 4 hours. But I really like Cloud Atlas.
Every minute of it.
It's not brilliant, but it's very good and very interesting.
Half right there.
Thank you, Darren. I really liked it. I really like Cloud Atlas. It's a lot of good stuff in it, but it's not as coherent as a lot of the other stuff.
No,
The Matrix is probably pure Wachowski in the sense that this is a distillation in perfect length, form, and thing.
In terms of technical craft,
The Matrix
it's nothing like
as a turn of the century movie too, and an intersection of differing sensibilities in film and in audiences is just incredible.
Like
it is breathtaking.
I would have loved the Wachowskis. I saw
anime.
I saw Bound before that. Like, and Bound is fantastic. Like, it's one of the great little
sort of
kinky film noirs, like kind of thing. It's great.
Sort of like a trashy 90s movie, as I recall,
but
a very good example.
But a lot more going on than that, like, which I always liked about it. But this, like, they're all the kind of things are there. Like, it's like about identity and rebirth and becoming who you're supposed to be. All these things.
I mean, it's
are
worth
there.
noting, by the way, that the red pill allegedly now, according to I think it's Mark Harris in Vulture, when you were taking estrogen supplements in 1999, you would have been given a red pill.
Yes, that's interesting. And Eve Martin put an article out yesterday, I think,
yes, which is very worth
which
reading.
I read about the kind of trans identity in The Matrix, and it's really good. And some of it you pick up on, some of it's not so kind
some
of
it's
over.
more specific.
Yeah, and it's really interesting and really good, and I recommend it. But this is great. It's an astonishing blockbuster in its own right. Similarly to Inside Man, if there was nothing else as just a technical skill film, it's one of the greats. Like, it's one of the absolute greats. Even with nothing else
involved. The language
involved.
of the bullet time sequence, the cameras whirling,
you take out the phones maybe, which are little flip down things like. and some of the music choices, this could be made today. Like,
I mean,
like it's that good.
Vulture
It looks
did a
that good.
really good week, and again, I'll be discussing this on another podcast I host later in the summer. But Vulture did a really good week early in 2019. That was the Matrix week, and they went through like the sheer. And again, they probably just scratched the surface. But in terms of things like, it was around the time that you started getting skinny guys as your heroes, where you started getting heroes who dressed entirely in black, where sunglasses during the day came back into fashion.
Yeah.
Things
Really
is like
long leather coats.
that's it.
And
Things that were as simple as
the
that.
dominatrix style stuff that Carrie-Anne Moss makes.
brings, yes.
Stunning outfits. My
But like,
God.
there are so few films that are just so instantly cool.
You're absolutely right, and it is, and
that
still
they
is.
arrive in cinema.
20 years
like,
later.
I remember discussing it with a good friend of mine, and we were on about, just that opening scene where what you call it, Trinity runs along the walls and then it stops and the camera pans around her. I remember my friend just going, the first time I saw that, my mouth just dropped open. I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it's just like, if you go back and watch it now and think about how ingrained it's become in pop culture, and think there was a time when this didn't exist. And we didn't know it was coming. People.
I mean, and even DVD and its impact on home media, for example, it was the biggest selling DVD of all time at the time it was released. It was the first DVD that we watched as a family. It was also the first DVD that introduced the concept of special features. It is astounding, the level of like impact.
Oh, and the soundtrack is awesome.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Like, it's
every aspect of
the
it.
direction with which Wachowski's, the control of tone and the skills applied is unbelievable.
When we first got DVDs, and because DVDs had this at the time revolutionary notion where you could skip through different scenes, there were certain films that we used to just watch certain scenes from over and over, and the bit in The Matrix where they walk into the lobby and just waste everyone in it, we would just watch that.
Where you put the bag in the thing.
And over again, like just go back, we'll watch it again, go back, we'll watch it again, go back, we'll watch it again. Didn't watch the rest of the movie half the time, just watch that.
I can see that though.
And the helicopter.
I can see,
I was actually thinking of that sequence.
It's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the top 3 blockbusters of all time, in my opinion.
Yes, we were talking about this. We had this conversation earlier. For you, it's comfortably the best blockbuster of the 90s.
Oh, by miles, absolute miles.
And while I may not personally go that far, I can certainly see it.
Yeah,
it is 5 stars though for me.
Oh,
it's
glorious.
It's not my blockbuster 90s pick.
Yeah.
It's glorious. But that's me.
Almost
for the
as good
week.
as Cloud Atlas.
A shortage of perfect movies in this world. Oh,
there are.
Sorry, The Matrix exists.
I agree completely.
All right, Ronan, you have just watched Vardas.
I got 10 Vardas in, but I did fit in 2 other things real quickly. Styx is a new Austrian film that is coming out here in about 2 months, I think. It was the IFI's Mystery Matinee. I'm very excited for this. Haven't seen one in ages, and the last one was The Long Goodbye. So I was...
all set.
Yeah, I was all set. It's rubbish.
Oh.
It's,
sticks it to it.
white lady goes on yachting trip, meets migrants, realises that
Racism
white
is
culture,
bad.
not so good. It's got quite good reviews,
profound,
but, it's exactly that kind of thing that
It sticks in
an
your craw.
upstanding moral drama from a foreign country tends to go down quite well in English-speaking lands.
Just didn't float your boat.
Stop it at once. This is by Wolfgang Fischer, who did The Counterfeiters a few years back.
No, okay.
I've seen The Counterfeiters, but I can't recall The
Counterfeiters was fine. I think it won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film.
Which is a very strange award.
Yeah, very much. It sometimes goes to the best film of the year, and it sometimes goes to absolute dross. This, was it a submission? Might have been a submission. It's kind of technically accomplished. It's very like All Is Lost in that there's very little dialogue. It's just one woman against the elements, and it does have a sort of impressive feminist streak. She does not, there are a lot of nice scenes where she is talking to men over her, what do you call it? I'm not a seagoing man. Not over her wheel, over her radio thing. Is it a radio? Okay. Do you just call it a radio?
Really? That's what you were struggling with?
Yeah, it really was.
Did she have to hold a button on it and hold it to her mouth to talk?
Yes.
That's a radio.
Gets the German equivalent of, "You're right there, love." And just sort of, bats them away. There's a lot of good stuff like that. And it's kind of interesting for the first while. It's very, very slow. But then she finds a sinking ship of migrants and constantly calls Coast Guard, who tells her, "Don't go near, we'll be there soon." Guess what? They're not there soon. It just feels like it's making a sort of profound moral statement about what if our whole society doesn't actually care about people who don't look like us. We know this. We know this. And it bills this as if it's some great revelation. It's possibly the most middle class film I've ever seen.
It just doesn't stick to the landing, no?
Yeah, no. Didn't do it for me. And the other thing I fit in was also at the IFI, the first of their Ed O'Brien Country Girls trilogy series.
Oh, yeah.
The Country Girls itself from 84. Interestingly, this is the first book, but it was adapted third. All 3 films were directed by Desmond Davis from scripts by Edna O'Brien herself. Why they made this last, I don't know. It's got Sam Neill in it. Very strange.
Say what?
Yeah, very, very young Sam Neill, fresh off Possession, looking like a bit of a snack, gotta tell you. Cozying up to an Irish teenage girl, which is creepy, but...
Less snackish.
Yeah. If you've read the novel, there's sort of really fascinating power dynamics going on here that O'Brien has such rigid control of. It's such a sort of... literarily accomplished novel that it doesn't lend itself well to a screen adaptation, so there are a lot of points where it just doesn't quite work, but it's really fascinating in that it's a film made in the 60s in Ireland, so we don't have many of those to begin with, written by a woman as well, very unusual at that time. It's really fascinating, worth watching. I'm looking forward to seeing the others because they were actually made in the 60s at the time of the British New Wave. Desmond Davis was a big figure in that, so I suspect they may be a little more interesting. Because this one is kind of gesturing back 20 years, made 20 years later. It feels the weight of that at times. Very much looking forward to the rest, which are, I think, Wednesday next week and the week after, the 10th and 17th.
Mm-hmm. And Grace, what have you watched since... It's been a while, actually, so what have you watched since last we talked?
I probably watched loads, but I'm only going to talk about 3 because there was a period of about 3 weeks where I just didn't look at any films. So...
What was that like?
need
I
those
can't even
sometimes.
imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I was watching TV or traveling or doing other things. Anyway, the first film I will talk about is Captain Marvel because I finally saw it on Monday.
That may be in the top 10.
Okay, do I have to come back to it?
Can we come back to it?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Less excited for the next one. Saw Pet Sematary on Tuesday, which... Oh my god. Okay, well this one...
Darren, you're such a dictator.
I'm sorry.
Okay, well then the last one definitely isn't. I watched...
Us.
No, I watched Joint Security Area,
Okay, cool.
one of Park Chan-wook's older
I'm sorry.
films, which is not, in fact, his first film, even though loads of people on Letterboxd seem to think it is. But maybe perhaps the first one of his that made a bit of an impact. It is amazing because Park Chan-wook just doesn't make a bad movie, apparently. The guy's a genius. But it has, I was actually really surprised by how much this touched me because it has all the hallmarks of his films in the sense of like the layered narrative and the shifts in perspective and the temporal changes and, you know, this really black humor and then bouts of sudden, rather abrupt, bone-crushing violence, all of the stuff that you love about him, basically. But it's married to this incredible, emotional, really moving story that's so culturally resonant for Korean audiences, I'm sure, but also internationally, that it packs a hell of a punch, and in a completely different place to where Park Chan-wook films usually pack a punch.
Okay,
So,
I've never seen this.
it's really
I
good.
should get to it.
Basically, it starts off by showing you that in the Korean demilitarized zone, the bodies of 2 North Korean soldiers have been found, and they bring in kind of a neutral, invented
Sure.
international group to investigate it. I suppose it's loosely meant to be the UN, but it isn't the UN, but you get the drift. So anyway, in very typical fashion for his films, you sort of get to see it from one perspective and then from another perspective, and then the reality of it sort of plays out at the end. But the way it sort of brings you through all of these different shifts and the way and viewpoints and nuances and the way things get so twisted and like it's just astounding. It really got under my skin, and then by the end of it I was actually quite upset. So yeah,
That sounds good.
another masterpiece for a man who can do no wrong.
Perfect. I also watched a bunch of stuff, but it's a very busy very busy week release-wise, so most of them I won't be talking about right now. So they'll be coming up later in the show. What I did watch was I watched the Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983, because obviously not Key and Peele, just Peele's Twilight Zone reboot, and it's not really Peele's, he's just hosting and co-executive producing. I think Glenn Morgan's running the writer's room. But his adaptation of the Twilight Zone premiered on CBS All Access. Not currently available in Ireland, but the pilot episode
So says you, Darren.
So says me, stick in the mud dictator that I am, apparently. But yeah, so it premiered. The Comedian, which is the first episode, is available on YouTube, and it's also available on IMDb, starring Kumail Nanjiani, and I'll probably talk about that in a moment. But just the Twilight Zone, the movie, which is an interesting film.
Which I have seen. A long time ago, but I have seen.
I had seen it a long time ago too. I think I last watched it on my I did a big not a big rewatch. I watched the Twilight Zone from beginning to end when I was sort of like in my late teens, early 20s, because I wanted to sort of absorb it. Fantastic cultural institution. Same thing with Star Trek, where you've got that again, this is the Morgan's ratio, where you're doing a 24 episode season. 8 of those episodes will be terrible. 8 of those episodes will be pretty good, and 8 of them will, if you're very lucky, turn out to be classics. So about a third of the Twilight Zone are classics, and they're amazing. And
I've watched a lot of the originals when I had US Netflix years back. They had the whole thing on there, so I watched 3 or 4 seasons of it again. You really get caught up. It's fantastic.
It's amazing.
And the cinematography is astounding.
So the use of angles, the tight close-ups as well to disguise the low budget.
Yeah.
The performances from actors who are at that stage coming up. I mean, great examples. William Shatner in sort of Terror at 20,000 Feet, which is astounding. But yeah, even the kind of the fact that all of these stories have, like, despite the fact that they were 20-minute productions on a TV budget in black and white in 1959, somehow becoming cultural touchstones. Where you can do There's Something on the Wing and know immediately what people are referencing. And even like To Serve Man, or the fact that, like, you were joking about The Simpsons as like a language of cultural approach, sort of like a language of modern culture.
An exhaustive language.
But the fact that, like, for The Simpsons, the Twilight Zone is one of those things that it draws on, like To Serve Man being a reference for that, the stopwatch with Burgess Meredith being a reference, the scary door on Futurama, like riffing on what was it, All the Time in the World, again, a Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith did a lot of Twilight Zone stuff, including narrating the movie, which we're going to talk about now in a second. But the thing with the Twilight Zone movie is that it is almost impossible to escape the shadow that hangs over it.
Vic Morrow.
Which is the death of Vic Morrow and 2 child actors. This is astounding.
A helicopter accident.
Have you not heard about this?
Oh, yeah.
This is staggering. This was... so the original idea for the film was going to be that they would do 3 adaptations of classic Twilight Zone stories. They would do Time Out, It's a Good Life, and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And they would hire one of the up-and-coming young directors of the time, John Landis, John Landis, George Miller, and Joe Dante, to each direct one of those 3 sections.
Fine choices.
Which are really good choices. However, during production of John Landis' segment with Vic Morrow, there was a horrible accident involving a helicopter that took the lives of 2 children. And I apologize, I'm going to try and pronounce these. Mika Den Lee and Renee Shin Yi Chen. Who were apparently hired illegally as well. This was a huge sort of...
It was a massive scandal at the time, right?
Massive scandal. There was a huge inquiry as well, court cases, complete overvamp of the child labour laws. And it's astounding to me every single time that I watch the movie that they left it in.
Yeah.
Because, like, and it's very clearly, you can tell that they didn't have the completed thing because of how it ends. It ends very suddenly and very abruptly because they literally did not have the footage to complete it. But even if they did, there's something very creepy and uncomfortable about watching that opening segment.
There absolutely is.
And there's no reason why it should be there. And there's a sense that they know that because, like, when this was done, they immediately asked Steven Spielberg, who was just producing it, to come in at the last minute and direct the second segment, which is Kick the Can, starring Scatman Crothers. And it is quite possibly the worst thing that Spielberg has ever directed. And I've seen 42. And, like, it's entirely understandable given the circumstances. This was a fix-it job. But then why would you leave Landis's footage in there if you are going to do this? This movie runs, at the moment, 101 minutes. If you cut Landis's footage, it would be down to 91 minutes. It would be crisper.
Film?
Yeah, it would be a tighter film. And it's interesting because, like, that stuff is all there from the outset. So you have the Time Out, which is the Vic Morrow segment, which, by the way, is a really great screw you to all the people who are complaining about the politics of the new Twilight Zone. Because of course they are. Because it's 2019, and the internet exists. And people are on Twitter, and on IMDb. And they won't shut up, ever. But you have, like, people going, they've rejected politics as the Twilight Zone, which is ignoring the fact that Rod Serling explicitly created the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, but, like, I mean, you only have to literally watch 2 episodes to know that.
To
like,
get
it's
that.
not hidden. It's not,
No, it's not. He specifically invented the Twilight Zone because he couldn't tell political stories in other formats.
And, like, at the time, there was, like, McCarthyism and stuff. Like, this was
a
response. Exactly. And, like, they were there explicitly from the start. And it was... Like, nobody was surprised by it then. Yeah. Never mind now.
But, I mean, even the opening segment, Time Out, in which Vic Morrow plays a racist, which is something that I thought was very heavy-handed when I watched it about 10 years ago. I was like, well, this is cartoonish racism, where he was like, yeah, you got the Jews and the Africans, and you got the Mexicans, and they're coming in, and they're taking my job, and I can't get a break. I'm an American. That means something. And I remember watching this back in, 2009, and thinking, well, this is a little heavy-handed and on the nose. And by the way, really great cameo from Stephen Williams in a small role there. But it's watching it now, it feels rather it's still incredibly heavy-handed and awkward, but it feels like it kind of had its finger on the pulse at that sort of level of resentment that existed in a way that you didn't really see that frequently in that level of popular culture. The film is sequenced in such a way that the producers seem to know what order to sequence it, because it opens with the John Landis stuff, which is the controversial sequence, gets that out of the way. Then goes the Spielberg fix-up job, which is the worst part of the film, and is possibly the worst thing Spielberg's done. And then you get two kickers. You get actually two really good segments in the film. You get the Joe Dante's It's a Good Life, which is an adaptation of the episodes of the Twilight Zone. Again, you can name the Twilight Zone stories and people know them. This is the one about the small kid who lives in the house with a strange family, and a woman comes into town. She's invited to his house, and she very quickly discovers that things are not what they're meant to be. Because this kid somehow has the power of a god and has abducted random strangers to be his makeshift family. Ronan is shaking his head because
I don't understand cultural reference points.
Okay.
Ever.
But it's fascinating.
Aw.
I know.
Because it was, the original one was this sort of like 50s exploration of suburbia and American anxieties and conformity. And then it's repurposed for the Reagan era, where you have this idea of it doesn't actually matter if this family unit is made up of complete strangers who are terrified of one another, as long as they stay together and look like a family unit. That's what's
Nuclear
important.
family, that Reagan.
That's quite literally what
Yeah,
it is. It's mourning in America.
Yeah.
And it's very much, it's a single woman who is traveling by herself, who's
And
like,
pointedly so.
Pointedly, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like almost being stolen into this nuclear family because that's what society expects of her. And Dante is having the time of his life doing it. There's a sequence that's absolutely terrifying, but it's underscored with like cartoon Looney Tunes sound effects, like little spring loading, the boing, in the background. And it's
He's
amazing.
very good at that kind of thing, though.
Yeah, and Dante's having a great time. The cast are amazing. And then you get the final one, which is Nightmare of 20,000 Feet.
Which is the best one.
Which is the best one by far, and arguably every bit as iconic as the William Shatner original.
I would agree with
And
that.
I adore the William Shatner original. It's George Miller.
Yeah.
Again, George Miller, like at a time when he was relatively unknown in American circles, so there was a bit of a gamble. And he's doing this iconic story with John Lithgow as a man who's convinced that he sees a monster on the wing of his plane. And it's amazing. Like, the score is done by the wonderful Jerry Goldsmith. And in Nightmare at 20,000 feet, he goes full Bernard Herrmann. The strings are going... It's astounding. And you have, like, Lithgow, who is very much hamming it up.
Yeah.
You have Miller, who's all about the Dutch angles and the quick cuts and the overhead claustrophobic shots. The fop sweat. It's fantastic. There's, like, a wonderful moment. It's during a jump scare where, like... So, you know, the passenger has seen something on the wing... Everybody else has tried to calm him down, convinced that there's nothing there. He's almost convinced himself that there's nothing there. Lying down, covered with a blanket, shutter closed on the window. He wants to open it. He's afraid of what he sees. He pulls it up. He opens it. There's a monster there. But not only is there a monster there, we cut back and forth between the monster's face and his face. And like every third quick cut of like John Lithgow's face, Miller has like put bulging eyeballs on him in the style of like painting ping pong balls and asking him to close his eyelids. It's amazing and it's fantastic. And it just really commits. And it's the best part of the film. And it sort of like captures that gonzo quality really, really well.
I'd agree.
And then just very briefly, I watched the Comedian, which is the pilot of the new version of the Twilight Zone. And it's fine. It's very much in that mid-tier.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How long is it?
It's 52 minutes, which is far too long.
Yeah, why did that when the original Twilight Zone was 20 minutes?
The original was 20 minutes. I hear that the Nightmare at 30,000 feet, they added 10,000 feet because it's just that much more extreme.
Yeah.
Starring Adam Scott is only 36 minutes, and I'm quite looking forward to that when it becomes available in Ireland.
But,
the issue with the Comedian is, it's far too long. Because, again, the point of the Twilight Zone is that the morals are relatively simple and straightforward. Like, the messages are very, very simple. It takes 10 minutes into the Comedian before, like, Jordan Peele shows up to say, welcome to the Twilight Zone.
lad.
And it's a shame because there's a lot of good stuff there. It's all about like art and putting yourself into your art and whether you lose something in doing that and all this sort of like abstract stuff. And there's something very clever in the idea of like a Peele-fronted show. This one's written by one of the writers on Key and Peele, but written by, you know, one of those writers who's worked with Peele before, who's fronting this show about the question of whether or not like a comedian, you know, sort of how that pivots into horror and where the intersection is between the two. That's very clever. Kumail Nanjiani, who very kindly wrote the introduction to my book, so just in terms of discussing that. Darren name dropper Mooney, but no, he's very good in it as well. And I really enjoyed it, but it's very much mid-tier Twilight Zone. I really hope that it gets better as it goes.
Well, there's plenty more episodes, so
There's 9.
That's plenty more than one, though, Darren.
That's fair. If
Jesus.
it becomes available... I know, I'm so demanding.
I know, right?
But anyway, let's talk about the week in film news.
There's other things.
There are other things that happened.
What do you got?
So just... the Justice Department in the United States has apparently put the kibosh on Steven Spielberg's attempts to keep Netflix out of the...
I was not expecting this. I wasn't expecting the film to start with the Justice Department of America.
You looked shocked for a moment there.
I was like, hang on, what?
You don't hear about this, yeah. So they put the
violates
kibosh on.
antitrust laws,
Yeah,
they say.
which is like, so excluding Netflix from the Oscars could represent a violation of antitrust laws. I actually have
this has me really torn now. Am I allowed to root for the U.S. Justice Department?
No.
The idea is that it would violate sort of monopoly sort of constraints in that. Yeah, it's section.
I would love to be in a room with like the CEO and other peeps from Netflix when that news came out. I can just see them just going like,
Section 1 of the Sherman Act, which is agreements among competitors to exclude... Yeah, by the way, this is now the Sherman Act podcast. But agreements among competitors to exclude new competitors can violate the antitrust laws when their purpose or effect is to impede competition by goods or services that consumers purchase and enjoy, but which threaten the profits of incumbent firms. So, yeah.
You know what the gas part is? I'm not sure it actually is threatening anybody's profits. Like,
No, of course
people
not.
are still going to the cinema in droves.
Oh, yeah, no, but there is an Oscar bump. And so the argument is that by withholding, like, the nominations for Roma, you are preventing people from wanting to subscribe to Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how tangible that is and how you would measure it, but
Yeah, I
it is
think
a
it's the
quantifiable
difficulty is to measure.
Yeah, and I don't think that you really have to. All you have to do is just demonstrate that there's a substantive risk.
Principle of the matter is sound. Though.
Can I, not that that's I know it's not the same Monopoly, but can I just say I really hate Monopoly the game? I just want to say that apropos nothing. Because I mean, over Ridley Scott was talking about making a Monopoly movie, and nothing.
Monopoly exists in real life all around us. Tell them to just come and film a
not
documentary
a
about the
game.
housing
I
market
hate
in
the
Dublin.
board game so
There's
much,
your
it's not even
Monopoly
funny.
movie.
This would be great. I would love Ridley Scott's Monopoly movie. There would
But it
somehow
probably
be a
couldn't be any
montage.
worse than
not?
all the rest of his
No,
movies.
but
All the money
genuinely,
in the world.
just shoot it here as a documentary about the housing crisis.
True.
They are
Very
literally building hotels on top of people's houses.
Instead of making a Monopoly movie, he just reshoots all the money in the world with Mr. Pockets?
Whatever.
Yeah, just playing Christopher Plummer because the
Okay.
scenes are so...
This is all going to be weird, but that I just thought I'd say that.
No,
Just
it's grand because you've actually provided a pivot to the second news story of the week.
And that was accidental, ladies and gentlemen. I am not a professional.
But yes, we talk about monopolies and the terms that Jay loves so much.
Oh, God.
Fox and Disney now officially
yay.
done and dusted. CinemaCon announcing the new lineup of their program. Disney very covetously and enviously looking at Fox's sort of intellectual property and deciding what they're going to take forward. Also news about unemployment as well. There were jobs that were lost. So this is very
Plenty
much,
of them, I think.
plenty of them as well. Like there's very much a strong restructuring them. Again, the cinema market looks completely different. This is a game changer. Disney
Yeah.
effectively have control of pretty much every major
It's
blockbuster
extremely
that's coming in the
disappointing.
next 3 years. It's yeah.
I'm not right. And
No, I mean, like, you want to talk about monopoly and about risk and antitrust. The control that Disney have in the market is...
40% of the box office were controlled by Disney and Fox. I think a year or 2 years ago. Now that they own both, it's definitely going up to at
And
least
given
50.
that Disney have, like, bloomed. Like, I mean, we're talking about the possibility of Endgame having a $1 billion opening weekend.
What?
It almost certainly
worldwide.
Stop.
Yep.
If you consider the amount of tickets that are already sold, and we're still, 2-3 weeks out?
And then being sold online for $2,000 a piece.
Go
Now that is just
I will
daft.
That's not gonna be counted.
I will go to the movie. I will DM you spoilers for $20. That's my offer here, ladies and gentlemen. Get in there now.
The type of person who would want to hear spoilers without going to see the film will not pay for them.
I know.
I will say, though, vote for Elizabeth Warren. She may break up monopolies. There you go.
Thank you. The Scannain Podcast, Kingmakers. In terms of finally acknowledging it.
Don't vote for Leo Varadkar.
And while you're at
Sorry,
it, support
never.
AOC's
Never.
Green Deal.
Yes. Sorry, that's all our political bits over.
Is
Darren.
it-
Go
is
ahead.
it
Go ahead,
Jay?
Darren. There
but yeah.
might be more.
Just in terms of other news from CinemaCon, because obviously that's the big thing that's happening in the world of World Cinema.
Steady on. I would love to see your World Cinema Con. People dressed up as Michael Haneke characters. Come on, let's have
But
that.
to be fair, it's for
Look at the kids with the white ribbon.
It's not quite Comic Con. It's like it's for distributors and stuff like that. To be absolutely
Oh, good lord!
clear, like,
I've just.
I don't imagine.
That's my $1 million idea. I'm
love-
gonna make a fortune.
I love
people.
the idea of Alan Horn's like Alan Horn from Disney cosplaying as Loki. But yeah,
Oh
so
no! Sorry, I can't go on.
apologies. A whole fine. Biggest thing to happen in the world of cinema
Hit me.
this week, which is the CinemaCon, which is basically you had a slew of announcements and stuff like that. Footage, the first trailer from the Joker movie, footage from It.
Oh,
with the kids
the
and
Joker movie, yeah. Oh yeah.
Todd Phillips' Joker movie.
What
which
if a
is something-
Scorsese movie was shit?
We
Yes,
already have
enough
those.
movies about disaffected male lovers
David O.
with a
Russell, by the way.
propensity for
That's the
violence.
name I was looking
I
Thank
feel
for.
like we need to make another.
The Taxi Driver sequel you never wanted.
Yeah.
Well, it's more king comedy, to be fair.
Either way, I've never seen it.
And to be honest, the issue isn't so much the premise as the fact it's directed by the man who brought you War Dogs.
Stop making Todd Phillips a thing.
You Were Never
I
Really
will.
Here was right there, people.
Yep,
You
yep,
did not
yep,
need
yep,
to put
yep,
Joaquin
yep.
Phoenix into this heap of tripe.
He put himself into
And
it.
you
He's only
know
in
what?
self
This is going to garner a lot more attention and praise.
Oh,
which
I
is
know.
Shocking.
But
God,
from
I'm tired.
Not us anymore. Next.
And then obviously the It Chapter 2 unveiling footage as well from CinemaCon.
Enjoyable.
The young and old actors together again. Great cast they have for that.
I'm
including
going to
Bill
look forward to
Hader
that.
and-
I quite
really
liked it. I like the
Bill
kids.
Hader,
I like
Jessica
the story.
Chastain, yeah.
Not particularly scary at all, but I like the cast. And
There was
I'll be
precisely
there for
one
that.
scene that was scary.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
But I'll still see it.
But it was great.
Yeah. Well, no, it's very much, it's more Stand By Me than, The Shining.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Which is not the worst thing in
No,
the
it's
world.
not.
for it to be.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, because they're kids.
For
Well,
kids.
It is, though. It's a film you can show 15, 15,
Month-olds.
You can show to 15
Hi.
children.
Oh, all right. And again, in case our
it's getting
managing
delirious.
director,
Go on, Darren.
in case our managing director is listening to this, it's time for
Sorry.
the annual appeal. No, it's time for the annual
Oh,
appeal.
God.
Jay has not yet managed to
Oh, for
secure
the
a
love of
place for
God.
press coverage at the Newport Beach Film Festival. It's
No.
happening again.
Niall,
Every year we promise that we'll do it, and every year we fail.
it comes around quicker each year, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like, I mean, I should be on the plane now. When is it? Sorry, maybe not now.
It's on launching on sort of April 25th and running through to May 2nd.
I could go now, though, for early,
in
for
Southern
pregnant.
California.
The entirety of the time that I will be watching Endgame repeatedly.
But yeah,
Can't
so
imagine Jay in California.
I can.
Thank you, Grace. I can too.
Pair of board shorts.
oh, he's already
flip-flops.
setting up meetings.
Hey.
He's
Yeah,
already-
I can do
we've got a-
brunch.
We've got a lot
I
of
can
info.
Board
network.
under one arm.
I can swim.
Pint in the other.
Yes.
I like the way that you can hear the inverted commas as well. I can network.
I can
Whatever
network.
that is.
I can do FaceTime or whatever the kids do. I don't know what to do. Just they do that Instagram or.
I love the
whatever.
idea of Jay being in Alan Horn's office and just being like, "Hold on, I'm going to FaceTime you."
Alan, we got this. Let's get out of my
On
office.
Snapgram.
Who let you
The
in?
Snapgram, yeah. I'm all over the Snapgram. I know all the Twitters.
Hashtag influencer.
The face Twitters.
Yeah.
All right, but yeah, back to the
Jesus,
Newport
what are we
Beach
like?
Film Festival, which is running from April through to early May. On Sunday, 28th of April, the festival presents its Irish Showcase, which is an evening celebration of
What do
Celtic
we got?
cinema and culture. The event will feature the premiere of 3 highly anticipated Irish films, such as Metal Heart, The Belly of the Whale, and Rosie. Rosie, one of Scannon's favourite films of 2018, it should be noted, and
yes,
is doing
parish.
very well internationally as
I
well.
Good.
realize in advance that this is not a popular platform, but I do believe Rosie is coming to Volta for those people who have access to
who
it.
have really good eyesight and don't need high definition.
Or if you're a member of the Lighthouse and you have access
Yes,
codes for free.
That's
You
true.
do, and you've got free passes. But yeah, the Newport Beach Film Festival Irish Showcase is presented by Aer Lingus as well, with Screen Ireland, Culture Ireland, the Irish Herald, Irish Arts and Entertainment, Irish Film and Television Academy, Irish Film Institute, Galway Film Fleadh, Irish American Magazine, the Cork Film Festival, the Ireland Funds, Irish Screen America, and the Richard Harris International Film Festival. Oh, and the Virgin Media Dublin International Film Festival, the Irish Fair Foundation, the Consulate General of Ireland, and Muldoon's Irish Pub.
And they're
Jeez.
here tonight.
Dude's Irish pub.
Muldoon's Irish Pub really did quite well for itself there, didn't it?
I did.
But yeah, you can get admission to an Irish Spotlight film and the post party for $25 if you happen
Does
to
it
be
come
in
with
the
a
area.
pint?
Can we send me? Come on, Niall.
There's
Jesus.
still time. Set up a GoFundMe for this.
I might do.
Moving
Send Jay to Newport.
somewhat closer to home, but not quite there yet. The Celtic Media Festival, which is being organised by Screen Scotland, which will be taking place. It'll be the winners will be announced at the festival from the 4th through 6th of June. But today they announced the nominees for their esteemed Torque Awards for Excellence, and there's some very good Irish representation in there.
Hit me.
No.
In Best Comedy, a hotly contested categories, nominees include Northern Ireland's newest comedy hit, Soft Border Control, a brand new comedy set on the border, a mockumentary shadowing a fictional independent organisation backed by governments in London, Dublin, Belfast and Brussels.
Guys, that sounds like a Korean spoof movie.
Also,
sorry, but it
mockumentaries
does.
are extremely difficult to get right. I hope they do well, but
Unless you're
jeepers.
Christopher Guest, there's a chance you're in trouble.
In Best Current Affairs, Primetime Carers in Crisis got nominated there as well. The darkly comic drama Can't Cope, Won't Cope was nominated in Best Drama Series, which
I've
is
heard good
interesting.
things
I
about
That's
thought-
very good. I've seen the first season. I haven't seen the
first
second season.
season
It's
is good.
great fun.
I would have
Shanna
factored
Kerslake is amazing.
I haven't
I would have
watched
factored that on a comedy more than drama, though, which is
It's a bit of both, but yeah,
it gets a bit twisted as it
it's
goes on.
dramedy kind of stuff going on.
And in Best Factual Entertainment, The Rotunda, which takes a look at obviously Ireland's the world's longest running
It's
maternity
Ireland's
hospital.
version of One Born Every Minute.
In terms of factual series, No Country for Women, which is a landmark series exploring Irish women's lives since achieving the vote 100
And
years
literally
ago.
every country in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on. Sorry.
In Best History, Colin McRae's new feature documentary, The Ballymurphy Precedent, which told the story of the death of 11 innocent people killed by the British Army in a Catholic estate in Belfast in 1971.
Brits.
Brits. Sorry, go on.
Lomax in Éireann, which was produced and directed by Declan McGrath, is nominated for Best Arts, which features Paul Brennan, who's the composer of Kings and Unbruntonus, uncovering the story behind the trip of Texan song collector Alan Lomax to Ireland in 1951. A number of Irish documentaries are nominated for in the Best Single Documentary, and I'm curious what you gentlemen think of these.
Nope.
Okay, hold on. I apologise for this.
Really?
Anseo in Lar Anglana, in the
Beautiful,
shadow
Lara.
of the Glen.
Anseo, Elor and Clana.
Thank you very
Shadow
much.
of the Glen based on the James Singh play, maybe?
That sounds plausible. The
You
man
got
who,
this.
The Man Who Wanted to Fly,
Oh, I want to see that.
It's
That looks
just
cute.
it's just come out here now.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
and also The Camino Voyage.
I never saw
I
it.
saw an ad for that in T.G. Caher, and it was just, what's his face?
Glenn Hansard
That
rolling.
fella just singing. And I was like, Jesus, you would shove him out of the boat if you were to listen to that for hours on end.
I'd watch
Like,
that
we don't need
documentary.
you. I will row by myself.
But yeah, so those are the nominees. So a lot of good Irish sort of success stories there, and well worth sort of supporting. And
Lads.
yeah,
God, team.
all right. So I think that about sort of wraps it up in terms of.
It's
news
all
this
over?
week.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
There's
there's-
one more bit of news.
Okay.
It's Barry Pepper's birthday.
Barry Pepper, really?
Yeah.
I love that we're doing this now. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ronan.
What's
Whenever we mention somebody's name on the podcast, they have to be dead, Jay.
Well,
No, but
last
this is-
week we
Diane
said
Weiss.
we've got to start celebrating people while they're still alive, and the next day, and you
And the best you can get
Yeah,
is
it's a
Barry
fair
Pepper.
one.
It's
So let's
Barry
not.
Pepper's birthday.
That's
Barry
the best
Pepper
you can
has
do.
been very good in 25th Hour.
Barry Pepper's been great in everything. He's-
No,
Guys,
steady on.
if you want a dead person who was born on this day,
No,
No.
why are we combining these
Heath
things?
Ledger.
That's better. That's better than Barry
Heath Ledger
Pepper.
would have been forced
The whole
today.
purpose of the segment was for people who are still alive.
All right,
to
who else?
celebrate
Is
the
anybody
fact
else
they're
still
gone.
alive?
But I
No,
really
last
miss
week, yeah,
Heath
of course,
Ledger.
Heath Ledger, much missed.
And I like
sorry,
Barry
Barry.
Pepper. Sorry.
Sorry, Barry. I like
Barry
Barry
Pepper's
Pepper.
good.
Sorry, I'm being a bit
25th Hour
salty
is
here.
excellent.
Hey. Sorry.
Perfect balance.
I'm just Googling him to make sure I'm thinking of the right Bar.
The right person.
There are
right
multiple
pepper.
Wow.
Barry Peppers.
Okay.
You see, he's
was
such a
thinking of
he's
Finn
such a
Pepper.
he's such an
No, it
influence
is,
on
it is.
people, right?
Sorry,
No.
I had a face in my head. I just wanted to make sure it was him.
Okay. But Barry
He's
Pepper.
Canadian. I didn't know that.
Barry,
Hooray.
Barry Pepper for me. I have a big fondness for him in No Country for Men. What's it called? True Grit. He was in the True Grit remake with the Coen brothers.
That terrible Comer or something.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
He has a great face.
He's very good in Flags for Fathers, too.
Yes, he's got that sort of all-American charm, which is kind of great.
Isn't he in Saving Private Ryan?
I think he might. Yep.
He has
Okay, that's all.
great face for the close-ups.
All
So is
right.
Vin Diesel, so that's no real thing.
Oh, but Vin Diesel.
Yeah, they all die eventually. We all. It's World War II. They're all dead.
Before we move on to the top 10, Darren has a very important question. Is
Oh,
anybody going to
Christ.
eat that last tart?
No.
All right. Oh,
Sorry.
No.
I answered for everyone.
all right. At number 10, it's How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World.
Nah, still haven't seen it.
I haven't seen any
I'll be
of
watching
the
it at home
How
at
to
some
Train Your
point, I
Dragon,
would
so can't help.
suspect.
1.6 million euro at the Irish box office.
Yeah.
I really like that you've taken a tart at the point where you have to repeatedly say film names.
Don't worry. The Met Opera, Die
Oh,
Walkure?
Yeah, beautiful.
Die Valkyrie? That's the Valkyrie.
The Valkyrie, yes.
Jesus,
At the
Valkyrie.
Met in 2019.
Like I knew.
Okay, fine. Placed at number 9 on the countdown this week with a total of 16,000 euro.
You
Culture.
say people love Wagner.
People love Prosecco.
They finally met their match with this. At number 8, it's the Lego Movie 2 with 2.1 million euro in the box office to date.
It's alright.
It's pretty good.
It's
They just make an animated
it's
film.
good. It's okay.
I really
I feel like the top 10 just becomes one or other of you saying it's alright and me going, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the top 10.
Don't worry, it's Jay's turn next because at number 7, it's Green Book.
Best film of 2018. No, it's not.
Don't worry, it's fun. I
Lara
have the
Glass.
soundbite now.
I know you do. It's a matter.
We're going to turn that into a Twitter
It's
meme.
fine.
It's solid. It's like,
It is
again,
solid.
like as a piece of film, it's relatively well made. It's just very clumsy, awkward, and certainly should not be the best film of 2018 by any measure.
No.
God, it did win that, didn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Doesn't
yeah.
make the best film by any stretch.
Yeah. 1.2 million at the Irish
Well, a
box
lot of
office.
people in
and
my
we still
office
love
This
it.
liked
week?
it, so...
No, this week it only earned 24,000. Only 24,000.
Still more than
More
Met
than I
Opera.
earned this week.
This has been out for how long now? 2 months?
2 years.
It just
Yeah.
feels
Been
like
out
that.
2 years.
I mean, come on, lads.
Well, it was
Free
released in
Solo
the
was playing
90s.
for like 3 months.
Speaking of films that have been out for what feels like an eternity, Instant Family is at
Yeah.
number 6.
Darren's favourite film of the year.
That was
Somebody
literally on the plane when I was going to Canada. Why is it still in cinemas?
I'd be parachuting like a mofo.
We
with that thing.
tried to fly it away,
Sorry,
but it
everyone
just
was too
kept
busy
coming
watching
back.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
There are other films.
Every
it's not
screen around me.
mandatory.
It's true.
At number 5, it looks like it's Lucifer, which
Hang on, what?
The man himself?
which may be an Indian film.
devil's
I
in
think,
the details,
perhaps,
Darren.
which
Why
is
haven't you seen
what?
Why haven't you seen it? Have you
You're a
seen Glass?
token
At
resident
number
Indian
4,
expert.
it's What Men Want,
Which you have seen.
which I have seen, and it's probably about as good as it could be while not being actively good. Again,
Why
held
can't
together.
you just say it's terrible, Darren?
not
Just say it's
terrible. It's not
terrible. It's okay
terrible.
to say it.
It's probably not terrible.
It's
It's not
not.
actually terrible. It hits most
sorry.
of its
mild.
marks. It's incredibly
grand.
like it takes layups instead of setting up shots, if that makes sense. It never works for a joke when it can get the low hanging fruit nearby. It never pushes itself. It never excels. It just
So like
coasts.
me in school.
Yeah, I can relate to so much of this.
Yeah.
But Teresa Piensen holds it together through sheer force of will. She is phenomenal.
Good on
Get
her.
a new agent, Taraji.
Yes.
At number 3, and I believe Grace has actually seen this one. It's Captain Marvel.
Yay!
See, worth the wait. Sorry about that. I'm
Yes.
really sorry.
Okay, I have some thoughts. Captain Marvel to me has just been a wonderful discovery because first of all, it took me a month to go and see it, which is terrible because I was really looking forward to seeing it. And then for the first half hour or so it was on, I was like, oh dear me, this is like really bad. And then basically once Carol landed on Earth, it picked up and it just kept getting better, so that by the end I was like, I really liked this. And then I've been sitting with it for 3 days and now I think I love it, like really love it. I actually might go and see it again. But no, like I just thought this was great, like just so great and really, really distinctive to me in the way that, like, I saw this Twitter argument earlier of people talking about how Carol has no emotional arc in it, and I just thought that that's really silly. There was a whole Twitter thread explaining why this was really silly, but for me, I really liked the fact, and the thing that stood out to me about this was that Carol was so completely secure throughout. Like, she starts the film as an incredibly powerful, forthright, headstrong character who pulls no punches, is extremely confident and assured, and then ends the film just being like 10 times more powerful. There's no point where she's like broken down or beaten up or made to feel like she's less than. It's literally just this conscious journey of self-discovery where she does there's nobody around her building her up. Basically she does it all herself, and that just really stood out to me as a really powerful message. And there's this, I think this shot might have been on the trailer, so it's probably familiar enough even if you haven't seen the film, but there's a montage near the end because throughout the film there are these little snippets of her memories from when she was a child and you know, various points where she's just been knocked down and stood back up again. And there's a shot near the end where they basically just merge all those shots together as she stands up, and it's kind of like a hero moment, but it's just in context, it's just such a powerful moment. And then a scene at the end between her and Jude Law's character where I'm going to be a little bit
is great. I need
spoilery
a
because
gift.
it's literally been out for like a month.
But I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, she says something to him in an exchange that's just wonderful. Like,
Okay.
just a real
I never
moment.
have to prove myself to you.
What?
That's not actually what she says,
Is
but
that not what I thought that was the line?
Wait, I just said don't. What is wrong with you?
All right.
Good lord.
yeah. Anyway.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. Anyway. Thanks, Darren.
But no, even, like, I mean, I just, the
fine.
central character and the way Carol is written to be an incredibly bold, determined figure, I really enjoyed that. And I think the film around her is relatively plain as superhero movies go. Like, it's not even really that much of an origin story because, like I said, there's no stage in this where she's just a mere mortal. It's always this very heightened, grandiose, interstellar kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Setting that you're working with. So, like, I mean, it's fairly pedestrian in many ways, but I just thought that central message was so powerful, and Brie just inhabits her with just this incredible fierceness. Like she's
great,
just
Larson,
so
and I can imagine
steady throughout the
Sandra.
whole thing. She is never shaken at all, and it's really wonderful to see. The only thing I will say that did annoy me about it wasn't annoying. I just thought it was a bit unfortunate. Was the prosthetics that they use for a particular alien race is just really unfortunate, and it made me think of like a bad Star Trek movie, and that was not fun.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
But there's a good cat, right?
Oh, there's an excellent cat.
There's a super cat. In
Super
all
cat.
senses of the word.
Literally?
Yeah.
I have to see this.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack slaps.
It's perfect. What?
What?
Okay, fine. What I would say. Okay, cool. So we'll move on then is to at number 2. It's Us.
Haven't seen. Cover news.
Ooh.
I'll probably see
I
this
like-
weekend.
It's
I
not
like
very good.
It's pretty
at all,
good.
in any way, shape, or form.
It's pretty good.
It's interesting.
Thank you,
It's-
Ronan. Ever the diplomat.
It's okay. It's not
got
great.
I expect it to be the better horror movie that I've seen this week.
I know.
It's
Well,
got
we'll
But
see
more
about
on that later.
pretty solid class consciousness. It's got some interesting things to say. It just takes forever to say them and relies on very standard genre fare to do it.
I think it's exceptionally well directed. I think it's got a lot of things to say. It's not entirely focused on how best to say them. But I think there's a lot happening there, and I think that it's ambitious and it's committed to its craft.
I think it's a god-awful mess.
Would
There
you
you
be as irritated by it though if Jordan Peele hadn't such an air around him?
Oh, no,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
By air, I mean people expect like really
I mean, there is an
good
element to
things
that.
from him
I
because
think it's been overpraised because of that, and I'm glad
it's
for his
probably gotten a
success.
disproportionate amount of attention
Yeah,
because of
I think
that,
he's
though.
very
Not even
good.
necessarily that it's overpraised.
I think he's a very good director. I think people have gone to bat for it in a way that if this was a generic director, they wouldn't have, to a certain degree. And I can understand that, and I'd like to see Peele succeed because I think he's a talented director. But
Being honest, I don't think that, like, what's your point of comparison for this? The Purge movies are, like, nominal.
my point of comparison is literally this film. Like, it's not.
No, but if you're saying, like, people going to bat for this the way they wouldn't with other directors.
I think there are.
Yeah, but I think there's an
Well,
air of
yeah.
highbrow
I-
discussion around
yeah,
us
and I
that
think the
the
problem
Purge,
might-
for example, would not get.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
Purge,
That's
the Purge generally, like, the discourse around the Purge is like, this is a great concept, it's coming out, we're very excited, and then it's released, and everyone's like,
Yeah, but
that was kinda
nobody's
crap.
saying this is Get Out has brought an air of prestige to Peele that this is follow up as thing. I think it's really interesting. I've seen 4 or 5 star reviews of this that seem to say that they love it and then say, you don't think too hard about it, or you can ignore the inconsistencies or things that work. It's like, well, then they're not really 4 or 5 star films, are they? I mean, you're just saying it because you want it to be, as opposed to they are.
Okay.
And I think
I
that's
see
a
your
problem.
point, but I do think there are 5-star movies that if you thought about them, they'd fall apart, but you can enjoy them in the moment.
I don't think there's 5 star films that
Independence
fall
Day.
apart though. Stop it, Grace.
Independence Day.
Stop it, Grace.
Die
I
Hard.
love it.
None of it makes any
Die Hard
sense.
2.
Doesn't fall apart.
Die Hard 2.
I heard it's logically tight.
It is.
Die Hard 2. That's all I'd say.
All right. Anyway, having left that there, let's talk about something which I'm sure will bring much more consensus to the group.
Yay.
Dumbo at number 1 with €500,000 in its opening weekend.
Grim.
I
I'm
didn't
curious
mind the
about this.
trailer of this, and the reviews of it have left me running,
Really?
screaming for the hills.
The reviews have got me interested because they're so
50-50.
divisive and polar. That's it exactly. They're polarized. Like, this is not a film that everybody loves and not a film that everybody hates. This is a film where there are people who are like, this is amazing. People are like, this is the worst thing Burton's done. And that sort of range
That's
of...
a low bar.
But my issue,
I know it is a very
my
low bar,
issue
but it's
is
also
that
very high praise.
my
as well.
issue with that, Darren, is that what have we seen in the last 15 years that would suggest that this is a return to form from Burton?
I know.
Like, why would you
Burton
trust
on the
it?
can jury giving the prize to Uncle Boone Me and his past lives.
Okay, I don't know what to do with that, but you know what I'm getting at, though. You know what I'm getting at. Like,
Fine.
it.
I actually prepared that.
Thanks.
While we're here
God damn it.
mourning potential Tim Burton's, like, the steady decline of Tim Burton fare, it's really sad.
It's a touch of the Ridley Scott's. But like, I may see it at some point, because I think my niece wants to see it, so I'll end up getting dragged to it inevitably.
The elephant looks weird. I've only seen stills, haven't
Yeah.
seen any trailers. The elephant looks a bit scary.
I've just reached the point with a lot of these films where CGI things, like, I don't know, they just look so fake. Even when they look really real, they look fake,
Yeah.
and I just can't watch them.
We're very much in the uncanny elephant valley here.
Yeah.
We are. But I mean, like, the whole...
Imagine if people
Hannibal, if you
spent
will.
500 grand supporting actual elephants in the wild. That would be
excellent.
great.
Yeah,
But-
that's a fair point.
Also, ban live animals in circuses.
I think they've done that anyway. Also,
There's a lot of
search are
places
terrible
they have.
places to be.
But
Anyway.
again, like I think that for an entire generation of people, this will be what animation looks like to them, for better or worse.
I know, of course it is, and that's
Sweet
fine,
baby
and that's how it
Jesus.
is. But it
Well, I
doesn't
mean,
mean A, I have
I
to
don't
like
think
it,
that's okay.
and B, won't stop grumbling about it because I grumble about everything.
Okay.
And that's what we
No,
pay
I
for.
mean, I might see it. Maybe it will be really good. And it has Danny DeVito, it has Michael Keaton, it has.
It's that Batman Returns.
I know,
thing,
right?
Just
It's
give or
like-
take.
I mean,
like
they
Michelle Pfeiffer.
yeah, and
things.
has Eva Green, like, who can't do any wrong
Well,
except
even-
appear in good films.
Well, that's it. Eva Green's like career track record is of being the best thing in almost every film. in
I
which
wish
she
somebody
appears,
would give
which
her
is
good stuff to do because she is amazing.
Just maybe like aim to be the second best thing in a film, Eva. Just once. Just try it.
Don't be the Joel
Don't do it,
Edgerton.
Eva.
Don't be the third billing.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be that guy.
The Jason Clarke.
Oh, sorry, the Jason Clarke, not Joel Edgerton. Yeah. He's
Poor
Jason Clarke.
All
Who is
right.
he? Her?
What,
Anyway, sorry.
What has he done? What's this guy? Who's he doing? What's going on now?
Ronan's looking him up.
Genuinely looking.
Really, Jason Clarke?
It's the Twitter thing. If
You'll know
if
when you
the
see
actor
him.
you don't know who he is third billing in a movie, it's more than likely Jason Clarke,
All right.
which I really like.
Ah!
Yeah, you see, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Third billing guy.
But yeah, so very busy week this week. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through the films that we haven't seen. Then we're going to run through the films that I know people at this table have seen. So opening this week is Holy Lands.
Say what now?
Yeah, starring Tom Hollander, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, James Caan, and Rosanna Arquette. Wow!
No.
Busy lately.
I know.
He's turning up in a lot.
Can do, eh?
He's terrific and out of blue.
It's got that can-do attitude. But yeah, Harry Rosenmerk, a Jewish American cardiologist, left everything to become a pig farmer in the Holy Land.
What?
Yep,
I am not James.
Wait, a pig
Can.
farmer?
in the Holy Land.
But
Is
he's
that James
Jewish.
Caan's or Tom
Yeah.
Hollander?
That's the
Hollander. Is it
irony.
Holland
Yeah.
or Hollander?
Hollander.
Which one is that?
I'm
Is he
so
the older
confused.
one? Which is the Spider-Man?
Holland.
Oh, okay.
James Caan.
Every time
I would watch the hell out of
every
that.
time I read a bit of news about like a new Avengers movie, I keep expecting Tom Hollander to show up in
I
a
know, right?
Spider-Man costume, looking like a sad sack.
Tom
and say,
Hollander
I wanna
Hollander
see-
is the one who was in Bird Box, right?
yeah,
Right.
Can we
Same
get James
movie.
Caan into the Spider-Verse 2?
yeah.
As
there's-
old Spider-Man. I really want to see
There are
that.
too
now.
many Toms in the world, basically.
But I
I'm so tired. I want to retire to Miami.
that's it. Yeah, just and that shot of
What am I
Spider-Man
doing
pulling
this?
up in a car,
Yeah,
in Toll
beside
Booth
my
and just
Miami,
getting
yeah,
shot. But
Right.
I do like. I think it was Luke from this podcast pointed out the image of like Tom Hollander as Spider-Man saying, "Defeating Thanos is difficult, lemon difficult." I was like, I was
nice.
sold.
Nice,
I
nice.
want that
Yeah.
movie.
Luke is very good at that kind of stuff.
Also out this week, The Keeper, which is the story of a man whose love for football for England.
Oh,
No.
Despair.
No.
No, Despair Troutman, in fairness. A goalkeeper who broke his neck famously in the FA Cup final and continued on and played, and he was in the World War II, so it's a kind of given the kind of prestige by epic kind of stuff that's probably not very good. It's got the kind of blandly 3-star reviews of like it's solid, predictable, fair, good story.
Hits all of its
yeah,
marks.
Yeah, it's supposed to be okay, but I don't know who's going to
Well,
appeal to
who
it. It's an
did-
older generational kind of thing,
who
and I
did
think
he
it's
play
chasing
for?
that money. Germany.
Oh.
No,
did
I
I
can't
just
remember the
assume
club
he
team
was
he played for.
English?
He's a German goalkeeper. He was in World War II, came to England, played in the FA Cup final for some, I can't remember, Man City maybe? I can't remember
Put his
who it was.
neck on the line doing that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
that was bad
Oh,
taste.
for fuck's
Jesus.
sake, no.
Sorry, that's my line.
Can we move on, please?
I bet you Eric Cantona is in this.
That is such a weird
Greatest
thing to
actor
say.
of our
Eric
generation.
in every
Cantona
football
and-
film.
It
Oh,
was
he
Man
wasn't in
City.
United Passion.
It was Man City, I was right.
Eric Hansen and I have the same birthday.
Oh,
Ah,
it's a nice
Fun
person
fact.
to share with.
Yeah. Also Queen Victoria. Go
With
me.
RuPaul.
And Bob Dylan. Ugh.
You've got RuPaul.
RuPaul and Scorsese.
Ooh,
And Danny DeVito.
it was
And
meant
Danny
to
DeVito.
be.
I do have Scorsese.
Wow.
it
So
was-
you
it
have
was
the
meant
same
to be.
birthday as Scorsese, and Niall has the same birthday as Spielberg.
It's mad, isn't it?
Amazing.
Darren's the same birthday as Nolan.
Why don't I have the same birthday as
He's changed his
Bertha, then?
birthday. No,
And-
not Darren.
I don't even know who my equivalent would be.
I'm looking these up.
Also out this week, and I'm,
I'm
fairly
curious.
sure that
Go on.
nobody at this table has seen it, but feel free to let me know if you have.
Oh, you will?
Peppa Pig's Festival of Fun.
Lols.
Oh, is this trailer? Is this the thing we've seen the trailer for? Did we see it, or am I dreamt? Did I dream?
You
this?
might have dreamt it
Where
up.
there's a Peppa Pig thing coming to the cinema where it's like 9 small cartoons for like 2-year-olds that don't go to the cinema. Is that?
Guys,
Yep.
I was 10 days off Sophia Coppola's birthday.
Aw.
That's not close, Grace. Really,
Only 10 days.
10 days is like it might as well be 6 months.
Oh, poo to you.
All right, so let's move through the releases that I know people at this table have seen in
I
ascending
foresee
order of
no
quality.
issues with any of these.
No,
Go
nothing
ahead, Darren.
whatsoever. All right, so a film that was very popular with at least 2 people at this table, I believe that Kelly Rohrbach's Happy as Lazaro is opening.
Yes,
this week.
I know you're not a fan, Darren, and I know Niall is not a fan, and that's fine. we like what we like, don't we, Darren?
Yes, we do. Thank you. That's a very open attitude.
Well, you know me, Darren. I'm very
nothing but tolerant.
Nothing but tolerant for people's
You're really
opinions.
looking forward to that Todd Phillips Joker movie.
Cannot wait.
I just discovered that Greta Gerwig and Catherine Bigelow have the same birthday.
But not yours, no.
No.
Who have you got then?
Eric Cantona
That it?
and Queen Victoria and Bob Dylan.
Jesus.
Dylan's not bad.
Dylan's not bad.
Ugh. I don't like Bob Dylan.
Ah well. And anyway,
Moving on.
Let's get back to Lazaro. Yeah, this is my film of 2019 so far. I thought it was incredible. This is the story of a young guy, a kind of pure-hearted, half Lazarus, half Jesus figure. Lazaro, played by Adriano Tardiolo, who does great work, I have to say. Who's living in a kind of life of contentment in this kind of sharecropper estate in Italy. And he's the kind of guy that's leaned on to do everything because he's uncomplaining and.
Ooh. I share a birthday with Oscar Isaac. Wow.
Oh, very good.
I'm officially the second most handsome person. I have that birthday.
Well done, Darren. Well done.
Thank you.
But basically, it
very
comes a cropper, if you will, when a kind of an issue arises around both a fake kidnapping and an end to the kind of
The
nefarious
land
land
share,
share
as it
thing.
were.
Where it turns out that it may not have been as far back in the day, and people were being kept essentially as kind of slaves for all intents
It's a
and
little
purposes.
bit of a spoiler.
Well, it's not really. I mean, it's kind of early on the film.
It's the halfway point, isn't it?
Anyway,
Okay.
regardless.
It just felt like that.
Well, if you read Peter Bradshaw review, he literally tells you everything that happens.
That's fair.
So don't read that if you're going to see it, although he does give 5 stars. And basically, something happens at a midpoint that changes the film, and it turns into something else completely, which, I mean, it's very difficult to talk about without kind of spoiling it. It basically, it turns from the countryside to the city anyway, and how people's lives have changed and how people's lives in the past may not have been any more different than the present. And it does extraordinary things around that, and around the idea of aging and not aging, and of being pure and not being pure, and how the world is awful no matter what time you live in. And I thought it was absolutely extraordinary. I was stunned by the kind of look at the social order of things, and how beautiful it was shot, how really, really strangely magical it is, and how big and showy the kind of themes are in the second half. It doesn't hide it. It's not trying to be subtle or pretend to be subtle about it. It's quite clear what it's saying and what it's going for. But I think I'm absolutely fine with that as long as the film can deliver on those kind of themes, and I think it delivers exceptionally well, and I absolutely adored it. And it's my number 1 film of the year, and if something beats it, it's going to be a great year.
Yeah, I'm not quite as keen as you, but I liked it a lot. I think it's remarkable in the way it plays with time, its sense of time. There's a moment where you realize this is taking place over a different period than you expected, and it's kind of incredible the way it snuck up on you.
Yeah.
There is one of the most visceral audience reactions that I've heard in a long time when we saw it at the Dublin Film Fest. I know Jay had already seen it previously, but there is something that happens at roughly the halfway point, and the audience made a very loud noise. It was kind of incredible to be part of. I admire it a hell of a lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I might catch it in this release because it's pretty complicated in a lot of ways, I think. And there's a lot to get out of it. So I might go back for a second helping. I do really admire its ability to sort of lean on, especially Italian cinema history,
yes,
to use the sort of neorealist tropes. It sort of explicitly invokes Miracle in Milan, things like this, and then brings things up to kind of the problems of the modern world in a way that's really effective, really clever, and I thought quite touching in time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I was not a fan. I found it very very straightforward, very simple, very slow paced, and grasping for a profundity that I don't think it quite earned. It has that sort of like Lazaro, whose character's attributes amount to sort of a blankness, which is treated as a virtue, which is nowhere near as endearing as the film thinks he or it is, or at least for me anyway. I found it really infuriating at times, to be entirely honest, which was Yeah.
It will not be in your top 10, is what you're
No,
saying.
but it didn't even make my bottom 4 of the film festival, to be fair. It got the Gentleman's too.
You had a bad run.
The Gentleman's
It
too.
got the Gentleman's too. It's competently...
Surely it
it's
got a regular 2. It
it's
didn't only get the 2
it's
because you're a gentleman.
competently made. It's like it's well shot. It looks beautiful. Those shots of the hillside are fantastic. I do like a little bit of like magical realism in there, but maybe do something with it. But yeah, it's just it looks pretty. It just doesn't, for me, do anything that I thought was particularly notable or meritorious. And it went on far, far, far too long.
I would have happily watched another hour.
At least the lead character had the luxury of sleeping through what felt like 20 years.
Ooh.
Anyway, also out this week on Netflix, The Unicorn Store, Brie Larson's directorial debut, which, yes, sold in 2017 to Netflix, released this week, tomorrow, actually, alongside Our Planet.
Just before you, is this one of these, we've no confidence in it, we're selling to Netflix films? Or is this one of these Netflix are launching?
Selling to Netflix is a byword for that, though.
It can be.
It can be occasionally. Like, there's a famous story that Sony tried to sell Holmes and Watson to Netflix, and Netflix said no.
Yeah, we're not that
And that was-
desperate.
Even Netflix has standards.
That was notably the punchline of that story, was that Holmes and Watson was so bad that even Netflix said no.
Christ.
This is, I mean, like,
I guess I have a different experience with Netflix to you guys.
there is something inherently cynical about this. Obviously, the release of it timed after Captain Marvel,
Sure.
starring Brie Larson and starring Samuel L. Jackson, stuff like that. And it's very clear that Larson, is doing something that she thinks is very worthwhile. There's been a lot of really great press around this. She did a wonderful sort of publicity thing where she invited primarily female journalists, critics, writers, filmmakers.
Depends who you ask how wonderful and
No,
positive
it
it is.
is
But
to
yeah.
encourage. Again,
No, it's great, but,
Larson's work is fantastic. In this respect.
The effort, the issues around it, and the people that
the
give her
people
shit
that
about
it
it are
attracts is
arseholes.
horrific and monstrous, and kind of makes me wish that I really liked the movie more than I did. There's talent on display here. Larson knows what she's doing. She knows how to work a camera. She understands what she's trying to do with the story. The only difficulty is that the film seems at odds with itself. It is at its core a story that is about the sense of, again, Arrested Development, which is a recurring motif in popular culture. There's another film coming out this week, which we'll talk about, which tackles this idea of an adult who is also a child. But also even like Little, which is coming out next week from Universal Pictures, and nobody wants to go see with me. But which again reverses the concept of Big by having an adult age into a child. This plays with those ideas as well, because it's the story of Kit, who is a woman in her 30s who lives with her parents, who aspires towards, again, as the title implies, owning a unicorn, but who basically is looking for a place in the world that hasn't, treated her particularly well. And there are reasons why that sort of story resonates. It affects, like, a great deal of millennials will see a lot of themselves in this. This idea of being told that you have to be an adult, despite the fact that society hasn't given you the tools to do so. Being told that you have to go out, get a job, get a house, get a relationship, even though those things are much harder to get now than they would have been for your parents and the people.
Get a
who are telling
haircut,
you to do it.
hippie.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And that's a very clever idea, and Larson approaches it relatively well. But the issue with the film comes down to one of tone, which is that the film unfolds in this sort of like heightened stylized world, which is very kin to, we talked about Tim Burton earlier on, but that sort of Tim Burton, Michel Gondry sort of world, where everything is sort of stylized and pushed up. And you have even like the drone world. She goes, one stage she goes out to get a job, an internship at a massive company that either manufactures vacuum cleaners or sells vacuum cleaners. It's not entirely sure what the distinction is between the two, and that's entirely intentional. But even that is sort of stylized in the Terry Gilliam sort of Brazil way, where everybody's wearing grey, there's not an ounce of colour, the sound of the copier is always running in the background. So everything is very much consciously turned up to 11. You have these stylized performances from actors like, for example, Bradley Whitford and Joan Cusack, who are playing her parents, who are constantly dressed in camping gear because that's what they wear. And it has this sort of like cartoonish quality, almost like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is fascinating. It's a great way to approach a story like this. Again, this is a story about a unicorn store. It's a store where you go to buy unicorns. So it makes sense for it to be cartoonish. The only issue is that Larson shoots it in the style of a Sundance indie. There's a lot of really tight sort of handheld close-ups and shaky cams, which go for a more authentic, more realist, more naturalistic approach, which jars with these sort of like cartoonish decisions like the score, which is constantly telling you what to feel, the fact that, the film is clearly pitching a contrast between Kit's fantasies and the real world. The only issue is that the real world is presented as so cartoonish that contrast doesn't really exist. Like, there's a moment where she goes to a store where Samuel L. Jackson is there, and he's got a bar that has ice cream, he's got a unicorn pen, he's got a giant television, he's dressed entirely in pink and has ribbons in his hair. And you're meant to think that this is outlandish and absurd, and it's clearly meant to contrast with the mundane existence in which he lives. But everything in the movie is a cartoon, so it doesn't really stand out in the way that it needs to.
Yeah.
And you have the whole film sort of falls into this uncanny valley between who is this for, what's it about? Is it a film for kids? If so, it's very much concerned with adult fears. Is it a film for adults? Well, it's very childish and cartoonish in how it approaches those. And it never quite gets the balance right in those extremes. And it doesn't work. It doesn't get the sort of juxtaposition that it needs. It's a shame because Larson's quite good in it. And also she shows a lot of talent as a director. It's just not as good as I hoped it would be.
I think it's interesting, though. American film is really interesting, and in the context of the indie American film scene, and how particularly around debuts, especially, and particularly films that go to Sundance and Slamdance, and that's a real thing.
No, it is a thing. It's an actual
it
thing
shouldn't.
exists,
It shouldn't be. It should be an actual dance thing.
Yeah.
And what's the other one in the other one that comes up after
Teleroute?
that? South by Southwest and
Okay,
stuff
yeah.
like that, where you get a lot of actors come with their first films, a lot of first-time directors come along, and there's an aesthetic, and it's not just the Sundance effect, but there's an aesthetic in American cinema that tends towards the bland, in the sense that there's no real risks taken despite the story, and that's in terms of filmmaking style.
It's a very safe framework for things.
And it's almost a template. And it's generally a lot. And
And
the
it's
thing is, a lot of
understandable and you're
filmmakers. I know,
learning and
sure.
you're coming up
A lot
with
of
your first
filmmakers
film.
will go on to do better stuff.
Yeah.
But what it does do, it brings a real kind of uniformity to American film.
Yeah.
That's a little disappointing.
And particularly to a film that should be new and fresh. And
Yeah,
exciting.
exactly.
It's one
Particularly,
thing-
and you get a lot of overpraise as well, depending on the night. You get a lot of audience members that love it, and it happens in. My arguments
I know
on
your
film
opinion
festival
about
things.
heights. I tend to take people at their word.
I know
if you
you
tell
do,
me you
but
love it,
you're a
I trust
naive
you.
madman.
Okay,
Darren.
but if you tell me you
But-
love it, and I believe that there are people that this will speak to, and I
No,
think that there's a lot
I'm
there.
probably going to watch it, but because I like Larson, and I'll probably give it a go. But it's a problem in American cinema because there hasn't been a Soderbergh or a
in quite a while.
Kelly Reichardt or whatever. There hasn't been the new voice kind of filmmaker in a little while, perhaps. Peel is probably the only one that's kind of note. That's
And he
kind
sort of almost skipped that independent circuit by going straight.
Yeah,
to the,
and
to
it
the
may be
horrors
Barry
and genre.
Jenkins the same to some degree because it's been so successful straight away.
That's it, pretty much
And
out
I
of the
like
box.
it, but in that kind of somebody coming to a festival with something and knocking it out of the park kind of thing,
Yeah, even
that's
like
something
say-
different,
Even like say during the 90s, you would have had like Todd Haynes.
But even like Shane Carruth would have been one that has kind of disappeared somewhat to some degree. But Carruth, you certainly know you're not getting the same film that everybody else is releasing.
And you can tell that Larson's sort of drawing from these influences, and there's very much like it's a sense that she's gone to these festivals and she's seen this is how you make those.
But
films.
that's exactly what happens, though. It is that influence thing.
And you understand it, and it's a way to make a film. Particularly if you're trying to make a first film, it's a reasonable way to do it. It just doesn't work for the script that she's been given.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
If that makes sense.
But I like almost wish I could write about these things and just so I can use the headline, "The Bland Leading the Bland," because it's such a great headline. I'd love to just use it, but anyway, I'm
you
not
can
gonna
write it from the Newport Film Festival.
I'm not
when we
yet.
send you
Yes, first class. I'm only going first class now. That's non-negotiable.
When you're pitching that headline, they're not inviting you.
No, that's probably fair.
Yeah, don't
Nor
maybe
would
not,
I, in
maybe not for
fairness.
your festival coverage. In terms of other films being released this week, I believe Ronan may have seen this one.
Jesus Christ.
The
what?
Sisters Brothers. What?
No.
I loaned you the disc. Okay.
Yeah, and you know that never works.
All right, fine. The Sisters Brothers is out this week then.
I didn't have a DVD player or something to play.
I don't. We eventually got
He-
one.
he
I've
built
not
one.
used it yet.
Using
It
just
took him 6
coconuts
months
and,
to build one.
Coconuts and
They could have
wire.
bought €12 on eBay.
All right then, I guess Darren's covering this one as well. The Sister Brothers is out this week.
Don't be passive aggressive, Darren. Come on, you're better than that.
I am better. No, I'm
Get
not.
active
You're not.
aggressive.
I'm not. But yeah, so Jacques Audiard's new Western,
Which
starring
I'm really
John
forward to
C.
catch because I
Reilly,
do like Western and I will see this.
even though you hated the trailer.
I found the trailer's tone weird.
The tainted love to the sound of a music box.
Like it kind I will
shouldn't
see
have
it because
told
I
you
do
that
like a
if I want you to watch
Western
it. Yeah.
and I like Audiard. I mean we've
I
been
like
seen
it a
it,
bit
Bone
less.
is terrible.
I kinda
I'm with
like Rush the
Ronan on
Bone,
this, which is very strange feeling.
but A Prophet is one of the best films of this decade.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I'll give you that.
he'll always get a kind of a gentleman's watch for me,
Grace, yes. Oh, thanks.
if you will.
But yeah, no, like again,
Deepan is weird.
I've
But anyway.
somehow seen this 3 times, despite the fact that I don't
Darren,
really
you're
love it.
remarkable. How do you do these things?
Yeah, almost by accident, turns out.
It's never by. I do not believe this.
But yeah, I've seen it 3 times. It's perfectly solid. It's reasonable. It has a very good first hour. It sort of falls apart in its second hour, where it ends 3 times, and somehow keeps going each and every one of
So
them.
you've seen it end 9 times.
I've seen. Yeah, that's it exactly.
It's like if
just
you've
let me
seen The
break out
Return of the
advocacy.
King 3 times, isn't it? Except that'd be 15, 16 endings.
Was it?
Grace,
Yeah,
put it down.
was it
Sorry, Grace.
Billy?
I wasn't listening.
Grace. That's such a smackdown.
Billy Connolly's observation that, it's one Oscar for every ending. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
he's
this
right.
Sisters Brothers has this interesting thing about like modernity and like this idea of the push westward and the idea of the end of the frontier. All the stuff that Darren loves in westerns and the idea
me
of
too.
change and kind of growth and the idea of men who no longer belong and where they go and whether it's better to be out there or to find a place to call your own. All of which is very interesting. The two performances are very good. Problem is the script, once it hits a certain point, it becomes very episodic. It's then this happens and then this happens and then this happens. And each of those installments might be quite satisfying on their own, but they don't add up
Quite
holistically
yeah,
to something that
not
sort of
quite put
satisfies me. Which is a shame, because I otherwise quite enjoyed it, and I really liked the first hour of it. And then also out this week, Shazam. Wow, Darren liking the first 2/3 of a film is going to be a recurring motif, it seems. The new superhero movie, this one directed by David F. Sandberg, who you may know from Lights Out, which was a relatively underrated studio horror
I
film
saw
a
that.
couple years ago.
It's about rated as well as it should be.
All right then.
Which is decent. Like, it's okay, but
really
it's
good.
It's
It's
not
a great
really,
high
it's
concept.
a great concept is not a great film, Darren.
I know, but a great concept executed well is a good film.
Adequately.
All right then.
He ain't budging.
Yeah, he ain't budging on this one.
You know it,
yeah.
girlfriend.
He's not for turning.
All
I am
right,
not.
cool. But yeah, it's basically it's Doctor Who's Blink, but what if I'm a horror movie?
I'm probably not going to see this because it looks terrible.
It is not terrible.
No,
Jane.
I'm not saying it's terrible.
not
I'm saying
great,
I know
but
it's not for
terrible.
me. I don't think it's
I'm
going
not saying
to.
it is terrible, just that it looks terrible.
It's not going to be for me, though, is it, Darren?
No. Well, no,
See?
maybe the first 2/3 are. Just
Are they?
leave before you get to the
Are they?
action climax. Well, I mean, okay, the thing,
for a laugh,
I
Ronan.
I actually really like the first 2/3 of Shazam. It's one of the better superhero movies I've seen in a very long time. In large part because it
Hang on, what?
remembers the wonder of being. Okay, I saw Into the Spider-Verse, so that doesn't really count.
Yeah, okay.
Let's just take Into the Spider-Verse out and then say it's one of the best superhero.
So you're
movies
saying it's
in
better
the
than Endgame, and you're saying it's better than Black Panther?
Better than The Dark Knight Rises.
No, how long is a while, Ronan?
Nice, Ron. Stick
Nice
it all
try
in there.
there, yeah.
Nice.
Stirring.
How long is a while, Ronan?
As long as we need it to be.
Every week now feels like a month.
Who you telling?
But yeah, so Shazam basically, what it does really well in its first 2/3 is it embraces that sense of wonder and fun, which is largely missing from modern superhero movies because you have the template now that's been established by, say, the Marvel Studios movies and the model having it so efficient, where it's just turn, ploppy, plop beat, origin story, background, love interest, action sequence, oh, angst, oh, you can't do this, oh, wait, I can do this, why'd you tell me I couldn't do this, action sequence, end credits, cutscene 1,
Yeah,
cutscene
but
2.
that's fine, though, isn't it? Because, like, romantic comedies do kind of similar things, and as long as you do it well within the structure.
But like the idea with that, you kind of lost something, and it's kind of funny because we were talking like last week about Tim Burton's Batman, and the sense that you couldn't really do that anymore. Where there's a sense of like applying what feels like a cinematic or an old style movie telling structure to a comic book property in a way that's been sort of like pushed aside.
Is this going to be a Deadpool type thing? Please don't.
No,
tell me
no,
that.
it's absolutely not a Deadpool thing.
Oh, thank God.
It's a much more conventional sort of thing than that. It's very much it's big but with a cape. The idea is a kid stumbles upon powers that allow him to turn himself into a superhero, and it spends the first solid hour of it just having great fun with that concept. There is a montage set to Queen's Don't Stop Me Now, which is the best montage set to Queen's Don't Stop Me Now in the past 3 years at least.
Low bar.
Take that, Bohemian Rhapsody. But it's
Take that.
There is a montage
Sorry, I
of
don't know,
Shaun
wait
of
till-
the Dead to Don't Stop Me Now.
I know, I did specify
That's
3
true.
years.
We'll take a
That was a
lot
really great montage.
to overcome.
But yeah, it's great fun. It has this sort of like wonderful YouTube sort of sequence where he's learning all his powers, trying to be a hero, trying to figure out how to use his abilities. And there's an interesting motif running through it where like the central villain, who is very poorly defined as they tend to be in these sort of films, who's played by Mark Strong, who's Dr. Thaddeus
Mark Strong,
Bodog
really?
Savannah. Yeah.
What was the budget like? It must
After
be
Green
shite, was
Lantern,
it?
we're giving him a second go round.
Like, I mean, if you can't afford somebody better than Mark Strong, they must have been worried about this, were they? I like Mark Strong, but he's,
He's a strong
Who's
choice.
he?
An extra five
Barry
and got
Pepper was
Clive
right
Owen.
there.
Yeah.
Barry Pepper, right there all along.
But
Barry
like,
Pepper is the friends we made along the way.
one of the things that they do that's quite interesting is they play with this idea of who superheroes actually belong to in a way that I think is interesting.
Oh,
in
Darren,
pop
don't
culture.
poke the internet. You're going to poke the internet with this, aren't you?
But yeah, so the idea is that like a question of who comic books and comic book characters actually belong to, and the suggestion that with Shazam, which is a story about a kid who becomes a superhero, that maybe superheroes should belong to children, and there's nothing wrong with
And not bros!
Well, that's it exactly, because the villain of this film is
Darren,
Thaddeus.
stop politicizing things.
It's Thaddeus Savannah, who as a kid had a fleeting encounter.
Hang on, what's his name?
Thaddeus Bodog Savannah.
Would you
He
stop?
was created in 1939, Jay.
Yeah,
Pretty
but I
sure that's,
probably would have updated that a little. But anyway,
But they
I kind of
couldn't
like the idiosyncratic nature of it. But go on, yeah. Sorry.
Well, I mean, if you want your kid not to be bullied at school, don't name him Thaddeus.
I was nearly called Pierre, by the way.
Wow.
My dad had to put a stopper on that.
That explains a lot.
Thankfully, I would have been very different on this podcast. I'd be sitting here in a beret.
I was about to say, I wonder why you.
Oh, but I've seen more Vardas anyway. I know that. But such is life.
But yeah, so Shazam basically. But again, the villain of the film is a man in his 40s who feels like he's rightfully owed the power that flows through this kid. He's been given to this kid that he believes doesn't deserve this.
Okay.
So you have this idea of push and pull, and this idea of ownership, and this idea that maybe you have this guy who believes that superheroes belong to the kind of people who study them in labs, who do extensive research on them, who can cite facts and figures about them, who understand and have decoded the iconography of them. And Shazam is kind of like, no, maybe they belong to kids. There's an absolutely wonderful sequence in the middle of the film that begins as a Man of Steel style urban destruction sequence, but ends with two grown men throwing stuffed animals at each other in a toy store. And I kind of adore that aspect of it. The only problem is the movie runs into trouble in its third act when it devolves into, again, the sort of standard superhero template, the very much toyetic model of, well, we have to sell action figures based on this, so we're going to do what that demands.
The action sequences, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I mean, there is some good stuff in there. I particularly like a sequence where the villain tries to monologue across a mile of open air, and the hero can't hear him, which is a great gag.
Oh, that's quite amusing.
It is very amusing.
Okay.
But there's a lot of like, well, this thing that we're doing is something from the comic books because comic book fans like that, and also because it'll allow us to sell a few more action figures.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel
That's a bit cynical, isn't
entirely
it?
earned.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels very much in contrast to what the first 2/3 set out, which is this idea that maybe superheroes are okay if they belong to kids, and maybe there should be a sense of wonder about them as well.
I would probably agree with that to a certain extent, I have to say.
All right then, and a film that I know somebody here has actually seen.
Do you, though?
I think I do.
Okay.
Pet Sematary.
Oh, yeah, you do. Oh.
Fine.
Got me there.
I do, yeah. Outmaneuvered. So yeah, Grace has seen Pet Sematary, as have I.
Yes. Pet Cemetery is fine.
All right then.
It is perfectly fine. It is competently made, generally underwhelming, quite pedestrian. It's grand.
That does not sound fine, Grace.
No, but it is though. From a purely commercial standpoint, it is a generic horror movie that people will enjoy. That's not actually scary or unnerving in any way. But
I'll go.
it's accessible.
You see, I know you're not as big a fan of the book as I am. I'm a huge, it's probably the most terrifying
also,
novel I've ever read, quite frankly.
Compared
Seriously.
to Salem's Lot?
Yeah.
No, Salem's Lot is creepier.
Pet Sematary has, well, I think how much you think about death might define how much you get out of Pet Sematary to some degree.
Yeah, that's fair.
That book haunts me, and that's where it lives, and the idea of kind of body decay and body changing and erosion, and I really like that. And I've always wanted to see, I said this day, I really like the 89 version, and surprisingly so, because I rewatched it thinking I didn't like it, and I rewatched it, and there's kind of creepy, violent, campy weirdness to it, which I really
with
like.
Grace on the Salem's Lot thing.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I like Salem's Lot too.
I like the
I like the show and I like the book, but
I found the TV adaptation very funny, which I'm sure I wasn't supposed to.
I think you only saw the theatrical presentation.
I saw,
the TV version is like 4 hours long.
Version of it. But no,
it is campy and fun.
I think
though,
Pet Sematary has incredible potential as a source material for film, but I would rather see it done in a much more mindfully
that's what I was hoping
horror kind of way, something that really leans into the ghoulishness of it.
That's what I was hoping for when I heard
this is just more commercialized, and it's grand. It's just, from my perspective, it's bad because it's not the type of horror that I like. But I can recognize that it is an accessible, undemanding horror film,
and will probably do okay as well.
I would like to see a proper adaptation of Salem's Lot, or not Salem's Lot, of. I would like to see one of those.
Me too.
Of Pet Sematary that leans into the darker aspects.
There's so much weirdness about Cemetery and flashbacks and
gets into
creepiness.
The mythology and folklore in there as well. Like, I imagine it's something as well that would really lend itself to a proper atmospheric, ghostly stage production too. And maybe if you were going to make it as a film, to make it in that kind of way, like something that's much more restrained and very much centered in one place. Because that's the other thing. I felt like so much of the book comes out of this. For me, anyway, so much of it is rooted in a sense of place, in a specific, haunted, really unnerving place, and I just did not get that from the film. And it's silly, because the film, like, wherever they were filming it, it looked amazing, these towering trees and very kind of oppressive skylines and all this sort of stuff, and they just don't maximize it at all. Like, even the house had great potential, because it's like a wooden house with these kind of pointed ceilings and massive rooms and kind of slightly shabby basement, and still I'm like, this should be creepier, and it isn't. But again, I don't think they were going for that angle with it, so Your mileage may vary.
I quite like this, actually. Graham, who also writes for the site, loved it a bit more than I did, but I have a huge soft spot for this. It very consciously and very, very, very overtly evokes The Shining by Stanley Kubrick, right down at the opening shot of like a camera panning over nature.
That's been done so many
cutting
flipping
to a family
times,
in a car journey.
Sick of seeing that. It was even in Holding the Ground and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
we want a moratorium, like the CGI deer, stop looking overhead shots of cars.
Okay.
Whew!
Okay.
Anyway.
They don't do an overhead shot of the car.
Also,
They
I
don't.
should say, in this, they depart quite a lot from certain things in
They
the book.
they depart reasonably, but I think they.
Are you talking the
retain
Shining thing with the
thematic-
lake kind of thing? That shot?
Yeah,
The
but
kind
it's
of
like that, but over
camera
a
shot
set of
and-
trees
yeah, okay,
and
right.
that sort of thing,
Yeah,
in order
okay.
to create a sense of like elemental, sort of like
Yeah.
the continent is scary. America is scary. America
Okay.
is a haunted house sort of feeling.
You know what
And-
did that super well? The Witch.
Which I quite like The Witch. But yeah, it has that sort of like the thing about the Pet Cemetery, which I quite like in terms of that sort of attribute, is that it feels like a good fit, if only because when you're reading Pet Cemetery, there's this weird thing where you can tell King hates Kubrick's version of The Shining, but in a way that he kind of almost envies it. Because you got this Pet Cemetery, again, is the story of like a failed father figure in the way that The Shining is as well. It's this idea of what if America was really like a haunted house. But he even like lifts elements that are not from The Shining, the book that he wrote. Elements that Kubrick ported into The Shining. And he's like, I'll take those and I'll work them into my own story. Thank you very much. And you have this sort of sense of like the burial ground, for example. Like the burial ground, the idea of this old Native American sort of haunted landscape is something that Kubrick added to The Shining. And you
Yeah,
can
but it's
tell...
also exists before The Shining, though. I mean, it's
I know, but you can
Poltergeist
tell...
and various other things over
Yeah,
the years.
but again, in the context of Poltergeist, be around the same time, wouldn't it? 79,
mid-70s,
80?
I
Yeah,
wasn't
okay, I thought it was a bit
Well,
later.
but that
I mean, I know
the old
trope,
Indian burial
the
ground
trope.
is an
I-
old one. Like.
Okay, I know. But you can tell, like, particularly in the context of, like, Pet Sematary, again, being the story of, like, a failed father who, like, by trying to protect his family, ends up tearing them apart, which is, again, it's a sort of a King cliche, but it fits very much in The Shining mold, and The Shining is very much your example of that, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what I like about the Pet Sematary movie, at least in the first 2/3, and it has the same problem the book has, in that like it gets to the end where it's like it's got this sense of existential dread running through it, this sense of fear of death and the unknown. Yeah. And the idea of like contemplating mortality and outside, and the idea that maybe the nuclear family unit is just as haunted as the entire country is, and this sort of like fear that runs through it. And it gets to the point where, like, King in the book and the film itself has to go, well, I guess now comes the stabbing. And that doesn't work nearly as well. At least it didn't when I was reading the book, and it doesn't work as well when you get to it in the film either.
I find that funny, because I think King has a tendency to really, like, catapult his endings into oblivion.
He's made a
like,
botch
Pet
of a few of them.
Cemetery, quite a few. Pet Cemetery is one of the few where the ending is better than the rest of the book, I feel.
I disagree.
'Cause it feels
I
it's
like all of it,
waiting
I have
for
to say.
something to happen
It's one of
for,
my
like,
favourite King
400
books.
pages, and then finally it happens.
I like everything in the book, though. Like, it feels haunted from page one for me.
I'm kind of with Jay on that. I did dislike the ending, and that maybe explains why I like the film so much, because the film, for its first 2/3, has this wonderful atmosphere. And again, you have this like sense of like the outside and the inside colliding into one another. You have this sequence where the father wakes up in bed with dirt on his feet after dreaming of being outside, where like doors inside the house open up into the wilderness, where the basement seems to stretch out into eternity. And there's this idea that like the American wilderness as this vast graveyard in which the settlers were never really welcome and will never truly understand in a primal sense, that this is somehow again tied to this idea.
Well, it is
of,
always
like,
that the whole Indian burial trope was exactly that, wasn't
exactly
it? It's
that,
like the genocide.
Yeah, that's
They're
exactly. It's the
building cities
unspoken
on top of
and that's
thing.
exactly
Yeah.
the basement, the thing that you go down into, which is under the ground where you've hidden these terrible things. And the idea that Pet Cemetery, and again, the film sort of touches on this very, very slightly and very obliquely, the idea that the nuclear family is complicit in this through inaction. The idea that like you don't get
as
to
long
draw,
as you get a microwave and a fancy TV,
you don't get to
you
draw,
can ignore it. Like
you don't get to draw a boundary line around the edge of this little part of American history if you build a house on it, if you make a home in it, if you pretend that this is a country that it's yours, that it belongs to you. And I really like that about the film. There's that aspect of the film I really, really like, the sense that like the outside and the inside sort of merge together. And the sense that, again, the family's essential, like, sins are, they're primal, but they're rooted in inaction.
Yeah.
And they're rooted in complicity. And they're rooted not in an active transgression, although there is a very obvious transgression. But the entire movie, and again, this is the thing where the third act hinges after the transgression. But the whole point of the movie is getting to, like, the point where that transgression becomes inevitable. And the story in the book, for me, works until that point.
Okay.
And the film has that sort of issue as well. I quite liked it. Didn't love it. It's no Us, Jay. You'll be sad to hear.
Oh, God.
Or happy to hear.
Oh, God.
But yeah, so that's
I will be seeing it next week before the next podcast, so wait for the hot take then.
Okay. And finally, because
There's
again, listeners, there is more. What is my film of the week? Is Leica's Missing Link. Which is the new animation from Chris Butler, which is really great fun. Had a big stupid grin on my face while I watched it for the full 90-odd minutes. It's not as beautiful, as elegant, as poetic, or as lyrical as Kobu and the Two Strings, which remains one of the finest animated films of the past couple of years. Please don't jump in with something on that.
I wasn't that fussed with it.
Really? You didn't like Kobu?
I liked it, but I thought it was a little overpriced. But I did like
find
it.
it very touching and
I liked the
affecting.
one previously better.
Oh, Paranorman.
No.
Okay. You're gonna have to give me more.
Give me a second.
Theme.
Box Trolls?
Box Trolls? Really? What?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Box Trolls is a...
Jeez, don't shout me, Darren.
Sorry,
Jeepers.
that took a...
I like all of them to varying degrees.
But Box Trolls is the one that stands out to you. That's interesting. Sorry,
I quite like Paranorman too,
No
but
judgment
I
here,
like
but-
both of them better than I liked Cuba and Two Strings, even though I like lots of that as well.
Yeah.
This one looked terrible in the trailer. Like I was when it came up from the producer, I was like, "What? Really?" I thought it was some fifth-rate animated studio trying to ship some crap out in the
You
middle of
described it as the
April.
Aardman, yes.
Yeah, kind of like
Aardman
what's the last Aardman one that was terrible?
Early Man.
Early Man, that was brutal, and it looked like it's kind of sub yellow pack version of that.
Okay,
Oh my God.
I really like Missing Link.
That's good to
and
hear
it's-
because I kind of might end up
Again,
seeing
it's very broad. It's like, again, it's not aiming for that level of sort of poetic, lyrical quality that Kubu has.
Which you don't always have to do.
You don't always have to do. This is very much, it's Butler sort of aiming for this old style. I was talking to Joe Griffin, and he was talking about how he sort of saw it as like an Abbott and Costello. Sort of
Okay,
thing,
now
where it has this sort of,
you've got me intrigued.
1930s like adventure. It's a map movie, is how I would describe it. It reminds me again of the serials that like Raiders of the Lost Ark is about.
Oh, for God's sake, what do you say? That's all you have to say at the start.
Okay, well, I want to manage expectations.
Sorry,
okay. But yeah, it's got this sort of like, there's a lot of sequences where characters like draw lines on maps and travel by plane, by stagecoach. Sorry, not by
Did
plane,
you not travel by
train.
map? No.
Yeah.
Is there a little transition where they have a plane going over a map?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not.
What?
I know.
It's just right there.
But they do sort of like have this quality where maps will fold out over the
Yeah,
screen
yeah.
and stuff. And it's very much, it's sort of like built around a caper movie. It's got this whole sequence of set pieces where you've got like, and again, those are designed to capitalize on the elasticity of the figures, which you don't
Okay.
really have.
I'm kind of in.
It's-
I'm kind of in.
And it's got like this really sort of great sense of humor through it as well. And it's just got this sense of like fun in there. And I mean, again, you don't have to say this. It almost feels redundant to say it, but it looks absolutely beautiful. Even the sequences that exist primarily for exposition. So there's sequences where it's like, well, I guess we're going to Nepal. I have to tell you for like 30 seconds why we're going to Nepal. They're walking by these wonderful like old lumber yards in Washington State with the trees looking like cogs that are orange and amber. There's a moment where Sir Lionel Frost, the main character, is chasing a Sasquatch through, again, the forests of Washington. It's got this huge geographical range where the production team are just able to like design all these different environments. So you have like the luscious greens and blues of leaves, and like you can tell that each individual like blade of grass was animated. You've got this wonderful image of little things like, for example, a shack that's half constructed in the middle of the woods, which looks almost magical. I really, really liked it. I found it very, very beautiful.
I wished you had a better trailer, but
yes, that was very much the reaction of other people who were there as well.
I was stunned by how banal and bland it looked, and I was like,
Okay.
really, it's from those guys?
I
But
haven't
I'm
seen the
kind
trailer
of
before,
crispy a little bit. If you do, let me know because it's bad.
All right. All right. For me, it's yet another triumph for Leica.
You put your big foot in it again there.
One to Sasquatch out for.
Jason.
I know, I'm worse. I don't know why I get involved in these things. I know.
All right, then. So with that beast of a podcast over, if people are looking for a bit more Jay, a bit more Ronan, a bit more grace in their lives, where can they find you?
At J Coyle on Twitter.
At Baron on Twitter, Letterboxd.
At Pixie Grace on Twitter and also Letterboxd.
Oh, yeah, I'm on Letterboxd. I never say that. But I am, somewhere.
Same handful.
I think so. I can't remember.
I think it is.
I think it is.
at J Coyle.
I never
give
give
a
that
handle
out.
on him.
Hey.
Oh, jeez.
I'm Darren _Mooney. You can follow me at Darren.
I'll say it before, and I'll say it again. Your parents
middle
should
name.
not give me that middle name. It's obscene.
Darren U. Mooney. But yeah, you can also co-host another podcast called The 250. Last week we released the first 11 episodes of our Twin Peaks podcast.
Oh, God, yeah.
Which
yes, you
people
did.
seem to like, which is great. Raising money for the Irish Cancer Society. If you listen, please feel free to donate to that. This week, myself and Andrew will be discussing V for Vendetta.
All 12 hours of it. No? Just normal end hours.
What?
That's in the 250?
Yeah.
Good God, people have no
It's a
taste.
very strange list.
What an internet we have.
All right, take it easy, guys. We'll be back next week. Bye.
Bye.
Later.